Since the dawn of time, humanity has reached for the unknown. We carved monuments into stone, raised cities from desert sands, and charted the skies long before telescopes or satellites. Civilizations rose and fell, each leaving behind fragments of knowledge. Some understood, many forgotten, and a few so baffling that even in our modern age, with all our science and technology, they defy explanation. What secrets did the ancients know that we have lost? What inventions, what discoveries, what flashes of genius have vanished into the shadows of history? This journey will take us across continents and centuries, from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the mountains of the Andes, from temples drowned in jungle to ruins swallowed by sand. Here, we will rediscover 40 ancient technologies, some ingenious, some eerie, and all of them reminders that the past is far less primitive than we often imagine. And so we begin where written civilization itself began. In Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, cradle of kings and scribes. It was here, in the soil of Iraq, that archaeologists unearthed one of the strangest artifacts ever discovered. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. A small clay jar, about the size of a fist, with a copper cylinder inside and a slender iron rod protruding from its core. But this simple vessel would ignite one of archaeology's greatest debates. For many, it became known as the Baghdad Battery. The jars were discovered in the 1930s near Kujut Rabu, a village just outside Baghdad. Wilhelm Koenig, an Austrian archaeologist, studied them and proposed a radical theory. These objects, dating back almost 2,000 years, might have functioned as galvanic cells, primitive batteries capable of producing an electric charge. His idea was electrifying in every sense of the word. Could it be that the ancients harnessed electricity long before Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Edison? The design, at least superficially, seemed to support the possibility. The clay jar, about 15 centimeters tall, contained a copper sheet rolled into a cylinder, sealed at the bottom with asphalt. Suspended inside was an iron rod, also held in place with asphalt at the jar's mouth. When modern researchers replicated the device and filled it with an acidic liquid, like vinegar or lemon juice, it produced a small but measurable electric current, enough to power a simple reaction. In laboratories, reconstructions lit up tiny bulbs or caused a faint tingle when touched by the skin. But what could such a device have been used for in antiquity? Theories abound. Some suggest it powered simple electroplating, the process of depositing a thin layer of metal onto jewelry or artifacts. Others imagine it as a ritual or healing device, producing sensations that priests could interpret as divine power. Still others argue that if it truly worked as a battery, it might have been a curiosity, a scientific toy centuries ahead of its time. Yet skepticism remains strong. Many archaeologists point out that there is no direct evidence the jars were ever used as electrical devices. No wires, no conductors, no written records describe their function. Perhaps they were merely storage containers, holding scrolls or sacred texts. The Baghdad Battery may be less a window into forgotten technology and more a reminder of how easily we project our modern knowledge onto the past. And yet, the mystery endures. To this day, the Baghdad batteries provoke wonder because they raise unsettling questions. If the ancients did stumble upon electricity, even in its simplest form, what else might they have discovered that we have lost? Could there be forgotten sciences buried in the ruins of long-vanished civilizations? The jars themselves sit silently in museums, their true purpose obscured by time. But whether they were batteries or not, they embody the theme that will guide our journey, that the past is never as simple as we think. The ancients were not ignorant. They were curious, inventive, and often astonishingly sophisticated. Some of their knowledge we have preserved. Much of it we have forgotten. And some of it, perhaps, is still waiting to be rediscovered. So let us step into that mystery together. The Baghdad batteries may or may not have lit the ancient world, but they have sparked a fire in ours. A fire of curiosity that will carry us through lost technologies, vanished civilizations, and the enduring genius of those who came before. This is not just a story of history, it is a story of wonder. And it begins here, with clay jars in the sands of Mesopotamia. In the heart of the Roman Empire, amid the grandeur of forums, temples, and amphitheaters, one achievement stood above all others in sustaining daily life: the aqueducts. While emperors built monuments to display power and generals carved their names into the annals of conquest, it was the aqueducts that quietly sustained the empire, carrying the lifeblood of civilization, fresh water, across valleys, plains, and mountains. These were not mere pipes or canals. They were triumphs of engineering and vision, monuments of stone and precision that turned Rome into the beating heart of the ancient world. The first aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, was built in 312 BC during the early Republic, under the censorship of Appius Claudius Caecus. Modest by later standards, it laid the foundation for what would become a vast network of more than a dozen major aqueducts feeding the capital alone. By the height of the empire, water from distant springs flowed into Rome through hundreds of kilometers of channels, supplying baths, fountains, households, and even the elaborate gardens of the elite. To walk the streets of Rome was to see water not as a luxury, but as a public right, gushing from spouts, cascading into basins, splashing in ornate fountains that celebrated both utility and beauty. The design of the aqueducts was both simple and sophisticated. At their core, they relied on gravity, carrying water from highland sources to cities through a continuous, gently sloping channel. The challenge was not in the principle, but in the execution. The Romans cut tunnels through mountains, built arcades of arches to cross valleys, and laid conduits underground to protect them from tampering or damage. The gradient had to be precise. Too steep, and the water would erode the channel. Too shallow, and the flow would stagnate. Using only primitive tools, Roman surveyors achieved tolerances that astonish modern engineers. Among the most iconic of these structures is the Pont de Garde in southern France, a three-tiered bridge of golden stone that once carried water across the Garden River. Its arches soar gracefully above the valley, a fusion of utility and artistry. In Spain, the Aqueduct of Segovia, with its towering double arcade, still dominates the cityscape after nearly 2 millennia. And in Rome itself, the Aqua Claudia and Anio Novus poured torrents of water into the metropolis, their remains still visible among the ruins. These were not just pipelines. They were statements of empire, declaring Roman mastery over nature. The water supplied by aqueducts transformed Roman society. Public baths, a cornerstone of Roman culture, depended on vast quantities of flowing water, as did latrines and sewers. The aqueducts fed the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great drainage system, keeping the city healthier than many later medieval towns. Fountains adorned every district, ensuring that even the poor could access clean water. For the wealthy, private pipes, often made of lead, carried water directly into villas. The availability of abundant water was part of what made urban life possible on such a massive scale, setting Rome apart from most other ancient cities. But aqueducts were not just practical, they were also symbols. Wrote proudly of the system, declaring it more impressive than the pyramids of Egypt. For him, the aqueducts represented the rationality of Rome, its ability to channel nature itself into service of civilization. The decline of the aqueducts mirrored the decline of the empire. As invasions, neglect, and depopulation took their toll, the aqueducts fell into disrepair. Some were deliberately cut by enemies to starve cities of water. By the Middle Ages, Rome was a shadow of its former self, its fountains dry, its baths abandoned. The ruins of the aqueducts stood like broken ribs across the landscape, reminders of a world that had once commanded water as easily as armies. Yet their legacy endures. Modern water systems still follow principles pioneered by Rome. To walk beneath the arches of the Pont du Gard, or to trace the course of the Aqua Claudia, is to stand in the presence of a civilization that understood, perhaps better than any before it, that water is life, and that to control it is to control destiny. The Roman aqueducts were more than stone and mortar. They were lifelines of empire, carrying not just water, but the promise of urban civilization itself. They remind us that true power is not only in armies or monuments, but in the quiet flow of water that sustains a people, turning deserts into cities and cities into empires. When we think of ancient Egypt, the image that comes most readily to mind is one of monumental stone. Pyramids, temples, obelisks, and colossal statues staring across the desert. But behind these iconic symbols lay another, quieter triumph of civilization. One written not in stone, but in ink and papyrus, and practiced with scalpels, bandages, and healing herbs. Egypt was not only a land of kings and gods, but also a land where medicine flourished with astonishing sophistication. From as early as 2600 BC, Egyptian physicians were recording their knowledge on papyrus scrolls. Among the most famous is the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a medical text dating to around 1600 BC, though believed to be a copy of much older material. Unlike many ancient writings that blurred science with magic, this document is remarkable for its clinical precision. It describes cases of head injuries, fractures, dislocations, and wounds with careful observation, prognosis, and treatment. One passage reads almost like the notes of a modern surgeon. If you examine a man having a gaping wound in his head, reaching to the bone, you shall palpate his wound. This attention to empirical detail reveals a culture where medicine was a craft as much as a ritual. The Egyptians were skilled surgeons. Archaeological evidence shows that they performed procedures ranging from setting broken bones to suturing wounds with linen thread. Skulls have been found with signs of trepanation, holes cut to relieve pressure or perhaps to treat head injuries. Remarkably, some of these patients survived for years afterward, as shown by bone healing. They also developed prosthetics, crafting artificial toes and feet from wood and leather. One such prosthetic, found on a mummy near Luxor, was so well designed that it allowed its wearer to walk comfortably. In these simple devices, we glimpse the roots of biomedical engineering. Medicine in Egypt, however, was not only about surgery. It was also about the integration of body, spirit, and environment. Physicians, called Sunu, were often specialists, focusing on particular parts of the body. There were doctors of the eye, of the stomach, even of the head. They prescribed remedies drawn from an extensive pharmacopoeia of herbs, minerals, and animal products. Garlic and honey, both known for antimicrobial properties, appear frequently in prescriptions. Castor oil, dates, and figs served as laxatives. Malachite, a green mineral, was used in ointments for infections. Some treatments were effective, others less so, but together, they reveal an attempt to systematically harness nature for healing. One striking aspect of Egyptian medicine is its combination of empirical knowledge with religious belief. Illness was often seen as the work of spirits or divine punishment, and spells and incantations were part of the healing process. A physician might both apply a herbal salve and recite a prayer to the god Thoth or Sekhmet. To us, this may seem contradictory, but for the Egyptians, magic and science were not separate. They were complementary forces. What mattered was that the patient was cared for with every tool available, whether earthly or divine. The practice of medicine in Egypt was highly respected. Physicians served not only common people but also pharaohs and nobles. Some traveled abroad, lending their expertise to foreign courts. Greek writers such as Herodotus and later Hippocrates acknowledged the debt of Greek medicine to Egyptian knowledge. Indeed, the very concept of taking detailed case histories and observing symptoms, cornerstones of modern medicine, can be traced back to papyri found along the Nile. Death, too, was a teacher. The process of mummification gave Egyptians unparalleled knowledge of the human body. In preparing the dead for eternity, embalmers dissected, preserved, and studied organs with a precision that few other ancient cultures matched. This intimate familiarity with anatomy surely informed the medical practices of the living, even if it was cloaked in religious ritual. What emerges from these scrolls, bones, and artifacts is a portrait of a civilization deeply invested in the art of healing. Egypt was not a place where disease was left to fate. It was a place where skilled hands stitched wounds, where knowledge was written for posterity, where tools of copper and bronze cut with delicate precision. To walk into an Egyptian house of healing would have been to see a blend of science and spirit, of knife and prayer, of herbs and hymns. And in that blend, we see the beginnings of medicine as we know it. The belief that through careful study and compassionate care, the suffering of the body can be eased. The stone monuments of Egypt speak to eternity, but the papyrus texts whisper something equally powerful, that even thousands of years ago, humans strove not only to conquer death, but to heal life. Across the vast landscapes of ancient China, from the northern steppes to the banks of the Yangtze, war was an ever-present reality. Dynasties rose and fell on the strength of armies, and in this crucible of conflict, Chinese engineers forged one of the most transformative weapons in history, the crossbow. Long before it reached Europe, the crossbow was already shaping the fate of empires in the East. And in time, the Chinese would refine it into an extraordinary innovation, the repeating crossbow, a weapon capable of rapid fire centuries before the concept of automatic weaponry was even imaginable. The origins of the Chinese crossbow stretch back as far as the 5th century BC, during the tumultuous Warring States period. Archaeologists have unearthed bronze trigger mechanisms from this era that reveal not only durability, but also remarkable sophistication. Unlike the simple bows of their neighbors, the Chinese crossbow relied on a metal trigger system that allowed a soldier to draw, hold, and release with precision. This innovation meant that even an unskilled conscript could deliver powerful, accurate shots, leveling the playing field against veteran archers who spent years training with traditional bows. By the time of the Qin dynasty in the 3rd century BC, the crossbow had become central to military power. The terracotta army, entombed with China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, includes ranks of soldiers equipped with crossbows, their weapons fitted with bronze parts so precisely manufactured that modern replicas still function. Some of these trigger mechanisms were standardized, suggesting an early form of mass production. This allowed Qin armies to field vast numbers of crossbowmen, overwhelming their enemies with disciplined volleys of deadly bolts. The impact of the crossbow on warfare was immense. Its range often exceeded that of traditional bows, and the penetrating power of its bolts could pierce armor and shields. Crossbowmen could be deployed behind fortifications, raining down fire with devastating effect. Military treatises of the Han Dynasty describe tactics where rows of soldiers would kneel, fire, and reload in sequence, creating near-constant streams of bolts. In an age when battles were often decided by close combat, the crossbow introduced a new dynamic, ranged lethality that could shatter formations before swords even crossed. But the most fascinating evolution came centuries later with the invention of the repeating crossbow, also known as the Zhuge Nu, named, perhaps incorrectly, after the famed strategist Zhuge Liang of the Three Kingdoms era. This device featured a simple but ingenious mechanism, a magazine of bolts mounted on top of the weapon, and a lever action that both drew the string and released a shot with a single motion. By rocking the lever back and forth, a soldier could fire bolt after bolt in rapid succession, unleashing a hail of projectiles in seconds. Though the repeating crossbow's bolts were smaller and weaker than those of the standard crossbow, its psychological effect was formidable. It could fill the air with darts, forcing enemies to scatter or take cover. In defense of walls and fortifications, its ability to saturate an area made it invaluable. Remarkably, this ancient machine gun of sorts remained in use in China well into the 19th century, proof of its enduring utility. The crossbow's legacy in China is not merely military but also technological. The precision bronze triggers, the clever repeating mechanisms, and the organizational systems that allowed them to be produced and fielded in such numbers all speak to a society where engineering and warfare were deeply entwined. These weapons symbolize a culture that valued ingenuity as much as valor, and logistics as much as courage. Today, when we gaze at the remnants of bronze trigger mechanisms in museums, we see more than fragments of metal. We see echoes of armies marching across ancient fields, the twang of strings releasing deadly bolts, and the minds of engineers who understood that technology could tip the balance of history. The Chinese crossbow was not just a weapon, it was a revolution in wood, bronze, and cord, one that carried the ambitions of emperors and the destiny of empires. In the ancient world, few names shine brighter than Archimedes, the genius of Syracuse. Known as a mathematician, engineer, and inventor, he was a man who could turn pure thought into machines of breathtaking ingenuity. His mind gave the world the principles of levers, pulleys, and buoyancy. But when his city faced the might of Rome, Archimedes became something else, the architect of war. Out of necessity, he designed weapons so ingenious and terrifying that they turned Syracuse into a fortress of invention and etched his name into legend. The backdrop was the Second Punic War in the 3rd century BC. Rome, already clashing with Hannibal in the west, turned its attention to Syracuse, a wealthy Greek city-state on the island of Sicily. In 214 BC, Roman forces under Marcus Claudius Marcellus laid siege to the city. Outnumbered and facing the superpower of the Mediterranean, Syracuse looked doomed. But Syracuse had Archimedes. The most famous of his defensive inventions was the Claw of Archimedes, also known as the Iron Hand. Ancient accounts describe it as a great crane mounted on the city's walls, with hooks or grappling arms that could reach out over the sea. When Roman ships approached, the claw would grab their prows, lift them out of the water, and then suddenly release them, smashing them against the waves or capsizing them outright. To the Romans, it seemed like a monstrous machine risen from the earth itself. Imagine rowing toward a city wall, only to see your ship lifted skyward by invisible hands, then hurled into the sea. Such was the terror Archimedes inspired. But he did not stop there. Archimedes also refined and deployed catapults and ballistae, engineered with mathematical precision. These machines could hurl massive stones or volleys of arrows at incredible distances. Unlike the clumsier engines of other cities, Archimedes' versions were adjustable. He designed mechanisms that allowed defenders to alter the range, striking enemies both near and far. Roman soldiers advancing with siege towers suddenly found themselves crushed by stones that fell with uncanny accuracy. Archimedes had turned geometry into artillery. And then comes the most debated and most dramatic of his creations: the burning mirrors. According to later accounts, Archimedes arranged polished bronze shields or mirrors to focus sunlight onto Roman ships, setting them aflame from a distance. It is a story that has fascinated imaginations for centuries, inspiring experiments from the Renaissance to modern times. Some scientists argue that it would have been impractical, requiring perfect conditions and coordination. Others have shown that under the right circumstances, concentrated sunlight could indeed ignite wood and sails. Whether or not it truly happened, the very fact that it was attributed to Archimedes speaks to his reputation as a man whose genius bordered on the miraculous. The siege dragged on for 2 years, with Roman forces continually frustrated by Archimedes' machines. Plutarch wrote that the Romans were so terrified of his inventions that they would retreat if they even saw ropes or beams projecting from the walls, fearing some hidden contraption lay behind them. For a time, one man's mind held back an empire. In the end, though, brilliance could not stop inevitability. In 212 BC, the Romans finally breached the defenses. Syracuse fell, and Archimedes was killed, despite orders from Marcellus to spare him. Legend holds that he was engrossed in his diagrams when a soldier cut him down, his final thoughts still on geometry rather than conquest. Archimedes' war machines disappeared with him, their designs never fully preserved. Yet the stories of his ingenuity endure, a reminder of how intellect can transform the battlefield as surely as armies. His machines were more than weapons. They were proof that the human mind, armed with curiosity and mathematics, could create wonders that bordered on magic. Today, when we speak of Archimedes, we remember not just the man who shouted "Eureka" in his bath, but the defender of Syracuse, whose inventions once turned the tide of war. In the clash of Rome and Greece, he showed that knowledge could be a weapon more powerful than steel, and that even in the darkest hours, genius could light the world. In the quiet courtyard of the Qutb complex in Delhi, India, rises a column of metal that has baffled scientists and historians alike. Nearly 7 meters tall and weighing more than 6 tons, this iron pillar, dating back some 1,600 years, stands exposed to the elements. And yet, unlike ordinary iron, it has never rusted away. Through blazing summers, torrential monsoons, and centuries of time, the pillar remains smooth, stable, and uncorroded. It is one of the most remarkable metallurgical achievements of the ancient world, a silent testament to a lost mastery of materials science. The iron pillar is generally attributed to the Gupta Empire, around the 4th or 5th century AD. An inscription carved in elegant Sanskrit dedicates it to Vishnu and commemorates a king, likely Chandragupta II. Originally, it may have stood at a temple complex before being moved centuries later to its current location. Whatever its exact origins, the pillar is both a religious symbol and a technological marvel, uniting devotion with craftsmanship. At first glance, one might assume the secret of the pillar is simply its size. After all, a single block of iron of such scale is impressive enough. But the real wonder lies in its survival. Ordinary iron, when exposed to moisture and oxygen, oxidizes and flakes away, eventually disintegrating. Yet the iron pillar has withstood Delhi's humid climate for over a millennium and a half. How? Metallurgical analysis has revealed part of the answer. The iron was forged with a high level of purity and contains an unusual mix of phosphorus, but very little sulfur or manganese. Over time, this composition led to the formation of a thin, protective layer of crystalline iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate on its surface, a film that prevents deeper corrosion. In essence, the pillar has generated its own shield, a process modern scientists call passivation. What is extraordinary is that ancient Indian smiths achieved this not through accident, but through sophisticated forging techniques. The forging itself required extraordinary skill. The pillar is not a single cast piece, but was created by hammer welding large lumps of wrought iron together. This would have demanded immense furnaces, precise temperature control, and the labor of countless smiths working in harmony. To imagine this process is to picture a roaring ancient forge, sparks flying, as artisans hammered glowing iron into shape, their combined effort producing a column that has outlasted empires. The iron pillar is not unique in Indian tradition. Other examples of corrosion-resistant iron exist in smaller artifacts and structures, but none rival its scale or endurance. It represents a peak of metallurgical knowledge, one that modern steelmakers only fully understood in the 20th century. For centuries, the pillar was a mystery to all who saw it, inspiring legends. Local folklore once claimed that if a person stood with their back to the pillar and encircled it with their arms, their wish would be granted. Others believed it was a magical relic, impervious to decay. Even invading armies marveled at it. Today, the iron pillar is more than just a scientific curiosity. It is a cultural symbol. It reminds us that ancient India was not only a land of philosophy and spirituality, but also a center of technological brilliance. Its builders combined practical knowledge with spiritual purpose, creating a monument that honored the divine while also achieving material perfection. Standing before the pillar, one cannot help but reflect on the fragility of human works. Stone temples crumble, empires vanish, and even steel bridges collapse. But here, in the heart of Delhi, a column forged before the fall of Rome still gleams, its surface smooth and strong, defying time. It is not just a relic, it is a message from the past. That ancient minds, guided by skill and devotion, could master nature in ways that continue to astonish us today. The Iron Pillar of Delhi is, quite literally, a pillar of history, a reminder that even in the ancient world, technology could create things that outlived the civilizations that made them. Deep in the deserts of modern-day Jordan lies Petra, the fabled rose-red city half as old as time. Carved directly into sandstone cliffs, its facades and tombs are breathtaking. But Petra's survival was not merely a triumph of artistry, it was a triumph of engineering. For the Nabateans, the desert was both home and adversary. Rainfall was scarce, flash floods were deadly, and survival depended not on walls or armies, but on the mastery of water. What the Nabateans achieved was nothing short of miraculous, a hydraulic system so advanced that it turned barren desert into a flourishing metropolis. The Nabateans, a nomadic Arab people, settled in Petra around the 4th century BC. They chose a valley hidden among rugged mountains, a place naturally defensible and well-positioned along trade routes. But Petra lacked rivers or lakes. For a city to thrive here, water had to be tamed. And tame it they did. Through an intricate network of canals, cisterns, reservoirs, and aqueducts, the Nabateans captured every drop of rain, controlled torrents of floodwater, and stored vast reserves for times of drought. One of their most ingenious solutions was the use of rock-cut channels running along cliff faces, lined with waterproof plaster. These channels directed rainwater and seasonal runoff into reservoirs, where it could be stored safely away from evaporation. Clay pipes, some still visible today, carried water through the city, while covered conduits protected it from contamination and desert heat. By maintaining a steady, controlled flow, they ensured a reliable supply even in the driest months. Equally impressive was their management of flash floods. Petra sits in a basin prone to sudden, violent torrents when rain falls in the surrounding mountains. Unchecked, these floods could devastate the city. The Nabateans constructed diversion dams and tunnels to channel floodwaters safely away, protecting their architecture while also replenishing their reservoirs. The Siku, the narrow canyon that forms Petra's dramatic entrance, was once fitted with hidden channels that diverted water away from the pathway, ensuring that visitors and caravans of camels laden with goods could pass unimpeded. Water was not only about survival, it was about prosperity. With their hydraulic genius, the Nabateans created gardens, cultivated crops, and sustained animals, transforming Petra into an oasis in the desert. This abundance allowed the city to thrive as a hub of trade, connecting Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Caravans bearing incense, spices, silk, and precious stones flowed through Petra, enriching the Nabatean kingdom. And at the heart of this wealth was water, controlled, stored, and shared with remarkable efficiency. Archaeological studies suggest that Petra could support a population of tens of thousands, a feat unimaginable without such infrastructure. Some reservoirs could hold millions of liters of water, ensuring that even during droughts, the city endured. To visitors, Petra must have seemed almost magical, a glittering metropolis where fountains and gardens bloomed amid desert cliffs. The Nabateans also elevated water into the realm of symbolism. Many of Petra's grand facades, including temples and tombs, are decorated with motifs of flowing water, channels, and urns. Water was life, wealth, and even spirituality. By controlling it, the Nabateans controlled their destiny. But as with many civilizations, Petra's glory was not eternal. By the 2nd century AD, the city was absorbed into the Roman Empire. Trade routes shifted, earthquakes damaged its structures, and over time, the city declined. Yet the water systems remained, silent witnesses to the brilliance of their builders. Even today, modern engineers studying Petra marvel at the Nabateans' ability to achieve so much with simple tools and deep understanding of their environment. Petra is remembered for its monumental facades, the treasury, the monastery, the tombs carved like giant sculptures into cliffs. But its true marvel lies hidden in the channels and cisterns, the unseen arteries of a desert city that should never have existed. The Nabateans proved that with ingenuity, even the harshest landscapes could be conquered. To stand in Petra is to be awed not just by beauty, but by resilience. For in every stone channel and carved cistern, you can hear the whisper of a people who mastered the desert and who built an empire on the simple, precious miracle of water. Long before pyramids rose on the Nile or marble temples gleamed in Greece, there was Mesopotamia, the land between rivers. Cradled by the Tigris and Euphrates, this was the birthplace of writing, law, and cities themselves. Here, people gazed at the sky and saw patterns in the stars, rhythms in the seasons, and divine order shaping both heavens and earth. Out of clay and calculation, They built not only the world's first great monuments, but also the foundations of mathematics and astronomy. Their ziggurats and calendars were more than tools or symbols. They were statements that the cosmos itself could be understood and aligned with human life. The ziggurat was Mesopotamia's answer to the question of how to reach the gods. Unlike the smooth-sided pyramids of Egypt, ziggurats were massive, terraced structures, rising step by step toward the heavens. Constructed of mud brick and faced with fired brick, these monumental towers dominated city skylines. Each tier narrowed as it ascended, often crowned with a shrine at the summit. The most famous, the Ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BC, soared above the plains like a mountain in miniature. To climb its steep stairways was to ascend symbolically from earth to sky, from human to divine. But ziggurats were not only about religion, they embodied order itself. Their proportions reflected the Mesopotamian vision of the universe, the earth below, the heavens above, and the sacred axis connecting them. Rising high above the flat Mesopotamian plain, they were also practical beacons, guiding travelers across distances. In their very bricks, sun-baked and enduring, the ziggurats declared that human beings could create order out of clay and chaos. Yet the Mesopotamians' genius was not only in stone, but also in numbers. These people developed one of the earliest mathematical systems, based not on 10, as we use today, but on 60. This sexagesimal system allowed for remarkable precision in calculations, and its influence still lingers every time we divide an hour into 60 minutes, or a circle into 360 degrees. To them, numbers were not abstract. They were the language of the cosmos. Nowhere was this clearer than in their calendars. Agriculture in Mesopotamia depended on the flooding of rivers and the cycles of the seasons, so tracking time was a matter of survival. By observing the movements of the moon and stars, priests and astronomers constructed calendars that balanced lunar months with solar years. Clay tablets record meticulous observations of celestial events, eclipses, planetary motions, conjunctions, all woven into predictions of earthly events. To the Mesopotamians, the heavens were a vast text, and the calendar was its translation. One of their most significant contributions was the division of the year into 12 months, each tied to the phases of the moon. Festivals and rituals were timed to these cycles, aligning human activity with cosmic rhythms. Later, Babylonian astronomers refined these systems further, predicting eclipses and tracking planetary paths with surprising accuracy. Their work laid the groundwork for Greek astronomy, and through it, much of Western science. The interplay between ziggurats and calendars was profound. On the summits of these towers, priests likely observed the stars, marking the passage of constellations and the rising of Venus or Jupiter. Some scholars believe ziggurats doubled as observatories, places where heaven and earth met not only in symbolism but in practice. From these heights, the priests of Babylon charted the skies, transforming celestial wonder into ordered knowledge. The legacy of Mesopotamian mathematics and astronomy still shapes our lives. Every time we check a clock or navigate by degrees, we echo the calculations first carved into clay tablets thousands of years ago. And when we marvel at a towering skyscraper or a stepped pyramid, we glimpse the spirit of the ziggurat, the human drive to build upward, to reach for the eternal. Mesopotamia may have crumbled, its cities buried beneath sand and ruin, but its vision endures. The ziggurats remind us that civilizations rise not only on armies or wealth, but on symbols that unite heaven and earth. And the calendars remind us that to live is to live within cycles, to measure our days against the movements of the cosmos. In the clay of their tablets and the steps of their towers, the Mesopotamians left us a message that knowledge is not only power, but also harmony, an attempt to bring order to the vast and mysterious universe. In the 2nd century AD, during the height of the Han Dynasty, China was a realm of poets, astronomers, and engineers. It was an age when the rhythms of the cosmos were charted with care, and when human ingenuity sought to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. Among the greatest minds of this era was Zhang Heng, a scholar whose brilliance spanned astronomy, cartography, mathematics, and invention. Yet of all his achievements, one stands apart as both extraordinary and mysterious. The world's first seismoscope, a device designed to detect earthquakes long before the earth itself gave way beneath human feet. Earthquakes were a constant menace in China. Entire towns could be shaken to rubble in moments, and tremors were often interpreted as omens from heaven, warnings that emperors had lost the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. To detect and record these hidden signals of the earth was to give rulers forewarning, a chance to act before disaster struck. Zhang Heng's invention, created in 132 AD, was a technological marvel centuries ahead of its time. The device, according to historical records, was a large bronze vessel, nearly 2 meters in diameter. Around its surface, 8 dragons faced outward in a circle, each holding a small bronze ball in its mouth. Beneath them sat 8 bronze toads, mouths open to receive the balls. Inside the vessel was a pendulum-like mechanism, sensitive to the faintest tremors. When an earthquake struck, even if imperceptible to human senses, the internal pendulum shifted. This triggered the release of a ball from the mouth of the dragon in the direction of the quake, which fell with a clang into the waiting toad's mouth. With a single sound, the seismoscope not only confirmed that an earthquake had occurred, but also indicated the direction from which it came. The sophistication of this device is almost unbelievable for its time. According to Chinese chronicles, it worked with astonishing accuracy. On one occasion, the seismoscope released a ball to the west, even though no tremors were felt in the capital. Days later, messengers arrived confirming that a powerful earthquake had struck far away in the western provinces. The device had sensed what human beings could not. Modern scientists and engineers have attempted to reconstruct Zhang Heng's seismoscope, exploring how it may have functioned. Some suggest a pendulum with levers connected to the dragon heads, each calibrated to directional shifts. Others propose variations with suspended rods or liquid damping. Though the exact internal mechanism remains a mystery, others propose variations with suspended rods or liquid damping. Though the exact internal mechanism remains a mystery, experiments with replicas show that it could indeed have detected ground vibrations and directional movement. What makes the seismoscope remarkable is not just its engineering, but its philosophy. To Zhang Heng and his contemporaries, the Earth was not random chaos. It was part of a cosmic system whose signals could be measured and interpreted. His invention combined practical need with cosmic order, reflecting the Chinese belief that disasters were messages from heaven. By giving rulers a tool to perceive these messages earlier, he was offering not only protection, but also legitimacy, a way for emperors to prove their attentiveness to the will of the cosmos. Zhang Heng himself was a man of immense curiosity. He created star charts, improved maps, and wrote treatises on astronomy. He invented a water-powered armillary sphere to model the heavens, uniting hydraulics with celestial observation. His seismoscope was simply one chapter in a life devoted to understanding both the sky above and the earth below. Though the original device has long since vanished, its story has echoed through the centuries. The very idea that an ancient engineer could build an earthquake detector almost 1,800 years ago reminds us how often we underestimate the past. The seismoscope was not merely a scientific instrument. It was a symbol of vigilance, a bridge between human beings and the unseen forces that shape their world. Today, in our modern age of seismographs and satellites, Zhang Heng's invention still inspires awe. To imagine this bronze vessel, with dragons and toads poised in silence, suddenly springing to life at the faintest tremor, is to glimpse the ingenuity of a civilization that believed the world could be measured, ordered, and understood. The earth shakes, empires tremble, and yet knowledge endures. In the quiet genius of Zhang Heng's seismoscope, we hear the echo of humanity's timeless quest to see the invisible, to prepare for the inevitable, and to wrest meaning from the mysteries of nature. High in the Andes, where mountain peaks touch the clouds and valleys stretch for miles, the Inca Empire wove together one of the greatest civilizations of the pre-Columbian Americas. Without the wheel, without a written alphabet, and without iron tools, they forged an empire that stretched more than 2,500 miles, linking deserts, highlands, and jungles. Their roads connected distant provinces, their terraces carved food from barren slopes, and their messengers ran faster than horses could gallop across mountains. Yet perhaps their most curious achievement was not made of stone or road, but of string, the quipu, a system of knots and cords that allowed them to record, count, and perhaps even tell stories. At first glance, a quipu looks deceptively simple. It is a bundle of cords, often made of cotton or alpaca wool, with smaller strings hanging from a main cord. But on closer inspection, the knots reveal a complex system. Different knots represented different numbers: single knots, long knots, figure 8 knots, while the position of knots along the string denoted units, tens, hundreds, or thousands. Colors of cords could indicate categories: white for silver, yellow for gold, green for maize. In effect, the quipu was a portable database, carried across mountains by Inca runners, used to keep the empire running smoothly. The Inca had no alphabetic writing system, yet their bureaucracy was immense. They needed to track harvests, tribute, labor, armies, and populations. The quipu was their solution, a flexible, adaptable system of record-keeping that required no ink or paper, only string and memory. Officials trained in its use, known as quipuxamayoks, could read and interpret the knots with speed and accuracy. They stood at the intersection of mathematics and administration, ensuring that the emperor in Cusco knew how much grain lay in distant storehouses, or how many soldiers could be raised in a province. But the quipu may not have been limited to numbers. Recent studies suggest that it may have encoded narrative as well as data. Subtle variations in knot placement, cord spin, or color combinations could have conveyed stories, genealogies, or historical records. Some researchers propose that quipus formed a kind of binary code, far more complex than previously imagined. If true, then the Inca may have possessed not just an accounting tool, but a genuine form of written language, one still awaiting full decipherment. The quipu was especially suited to the vast geography of the Andes. Messengers known as chasquis sprinted along the Inca road system, carrying quipus from one relay station to another. A message could travel hundreds of miles in just a few days, faster than many medieval kingdoms could manage with horses. The cords provided consistency, preventing miscommunication across regions and languages in an empire that encompassed dozens of ethnic groups. In its own way, the quipu was both a ledger and a unifier. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they struggled to understand the quipu. To them, writing was bound to ink on paper, and knots on strings seemed primitive. Yet Spanish officials soon realized the cord's utility and occasionally employed quipucamayos to aid in administration. Over time, however, most quipus were destroyed, dismissed as pagan relics, or banned as tools of resistance. What survives today are only fragments. Fewer than 1,000 quipus remain in collections worldwide, silent reminders of a system that once held the memory of an empire. To hold a quipu in one's hands is to feel the weight of both ingenuity and loss. Each knot represents not only a number, but also the brilliance of a people who found a way to order their world without letters. In the fibers of wool and cotton lies a testament to human adaptability. When the mountains made parchment impractical, and when languages were too diverse for a single script, the Inca tied their knowledge into cords. The quipu is a symbol of empire, of memory, and of the universal human desire to record, to remember, to preserve. Though its full secrets remain untangled, it whispers of a civilization that saw numbers and stories not as ink on a page, but as knots in a thread, woven into the fabric of history. Across the arid plains of southern Peru, where the desert stretches vast and empty, lie some of the most mysterious creations of the ancient world. They are not temples or tombs, not statues or palaces, but lines, simple grooves cut into the earth. And yet these lines, when seen from above, form vast geoglyphs of astonishing scale. Spiders, hummingbirds, monkeys, lizards, spirals, and straight lines that run arrow-straight for miles. Known as the Nazca lines, they are among the greatest enigmas of pre-Columbian America, a landscape transformed into a canvas so immense that only the gods or modern aircraft could fully appreciate it. The Nazca people flourished between 200 BC and 600 AD, long before the rise of the Inca. They lived in one of the driest places on Earth, a desert where rain is rare and the ground is covered by a dark patina of oxidized rock. To create the geoglyphs, the Nazca scraped away this dark layer, revealing the lighter soil beneath. With this simple act, they carved enduring figures into the earth. The desert's dryness preserved them, leaving their designs remarkably intact, even after more than 1,000 years. The scale of the lines is staggering. Some figures stretch over 1,000 feet, larger than the Empire State Building laid on its side. Others are composed of geometric shapes, trapezoids, spirals, straight paths that extend for miles. Walking on the desert floor, they seem random and unintelligible, but from the sky they spring into focus, revealing intricate patterns and elegant forms. The mystery lies in why an ancient culture without flight would create artwork visible only from above. Theories abound. Some scholars believe the lines were part of ritual landscapes, sacred pathways used in ceremonies to honor deities, especially those connected to water and fertility. In such an arid environment, survival depended on rainfall and underground aquifers. The Nazca may have walked along the lines as part of processions, praying for rain and abundance. Others suggest the figures themselves represented offerings to the gods above, designed to be viewed from the heavens rather than by human eyes. Astronomical theories have also captured attention. In the 20th century, some researchers proposed that the lines aligned with solstices, equinoxes, or star positions, forming a kind of giant observatory. While not all alignments hold up under scrutiny, certain lines do seem to point toward the rising or setting sun during significant times of the year. The Nazca may have used the desert as both canvas and calendar, tracking the cycles of the heavens. There are more speculative ideas too. Some fringe theorists suggest that the lines were runways for ancient aircraft or messages for extraterrestrials. While such claims capture the imagination, there is no evidence to support them. The true genius of the lines lies not in alien intervention, but in human creativity. How a people with simple tools could organize labor and geometry on such a monumental scale. Practicality also played a role. Recent research indicates that some trapezoid-shaped geoglyphs may have been linked to water management, marking underground channels or ritual sites connected to aquifers. For the Nazca, the sacred and the practical often overlapped. To honor water was not only an act of faith, but also a necessity for survival. Today, the Nazca lines remain both fragile and resilient. Air tours reveal their beauty to thousands of visitors, while satellite images capture their scale for the world to study. Yet they are vulnerable to damage. Natural erosion, climate change, and even careless human activity have scarred portions of the desert. Protecting them means protecting not only ancient art, but also the cultural heartbeat of a people who turned desert into a canvas. To stand on the desert floor is to see little more than lines in dust. But to rise above, to look from the perspective of the sky, is to see the vision of the Nazca, a people who carved messages into the earth for gods, for stars, or perhaps simply for the future. Whether they are prayers, maps, or symbols, the lines remind us that human beings have always sought to connect the earth with the heavens, to inscribe meaning on the landscape itself. The Nazca lines endure as whispers from the desert, mysterious, immense, and timeless, carved into silence and left for us to wonder. On the Giza Plateau, beneath the unyielding Egyptian sun, rise the last surviving wonders of the ancient world, the pyramids. Their silhouettes are etched into human memory, massive, geometric, timeless. For millennia, they have stood as monuments to the pharaohs who built them, yet they are more than tombs. They are engineering marvels, the product of vision, mathematics, and sheer human determination. How were such colossal structures built more than 4,500 years ago, long before the tools of modern construction existed? That question has haunted generations, giving rise to theories both scientific and fantastical. But the truth, what we do know, is no less awe-inspiring. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, completed around 2560 BC, remains the most iconic. Originally standing 146 meters tall and built of over 2 million limestone blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth for more than 3,800 years. Even today, its precision astounds. Each side aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, the base squared to within inches, and joints so tight that even a sheet of paper can barely fit between the stones. This was not trial and error. It was mastery of surveying and geometry at a level that still commands respect. The mystery of pyramid construction often begins with the question of transportation. How did the Egyptians move such massive blocks from quarries to the plateau? Evidence suggests that they used sledges dragged over sand lubricated with water, reducing friction and making it possible for teams of workers to haul stones weighing several tons. Canal systems may also have been dug, allowing boats to float blocks closer to the site. Far from primitive labor, this was an organized logistics system, carefully planned and executed. Then comes the question of lifting. Without cranes or pulleys, how did they raise the blocks to such heights? The most widely accepted explanation is the use of ramps. Straight ramps, zigzagging ramps, or spiraling ramps around the pyramid itself, all have been proposed. While the exact method remains debated, Archaeological discoveries, including ramps near other pyramid sites, confirm that such systems were indeed used. These ramps required as much ingenuity as the pyramids themselves, designed to bear immense weight while maintaining the precise angles necessary for construction. Equally remarkable was the organization of labor. Popular myths once imagined slaves toiling under whips, but evidence tells a different story. Excavations of workers' villages reveal well-fed, skilled laborers who lived in communities near the pyramids. They were not slaves, but a rotating workforce of farmers and craftsmen, conscripted during the Nile's flood season when fields lay underwater. Building pyramids was not just construction. It was a national project, uniting society in devotion to the pharaoh and to the gods. The pyramids were more than engineering feats. They were also cosmological statements. Their alignment with the cardinal directions, their proportions reflecting sacred geometry, and their internal passages oriented toward stars suggest that they were built as bridges between earth and heaven. To the Egyptians, the pharaoh was a divine being, and the pyramid was both tomb and cosmic ladder, ensuring his ascent to the afterlife. Every block laid was an act of faith as much as of engineering. The sheer scale of the pyramids ensured their survival. While temples crumbled and palaces vanished, the pyramids endured, their weight anchoring them against time. And yet, they remain incomplete puzzles. Did hidden chambers still lie undiscovered? Did ancient engineers possess techniques we have yet to rediscover? Each new archaeological survey brings us closer, but the aura of mystery lingers. What is undeniable is this: the pyramids are proof of what human beings can achieve when united by vision. With stone tools, wooden sledges, and sheer will, the Egyptians built monuments that outlast empires, languages, and even civilizations. They are not just tombs. They are eternal symbols of ambition, ingenuity, and the belief that humanity can touch the divine. To stand before the pyramids is to feel small, yet also profoundly connected to those who built them. For in their stones lies a message from across millennia, that with knowledge, discipline, and unity, even mountains can be moved and shaped into giants that kiss the sky. In the twilight of the Roman Empire, when the western half had crumbled into ruins, the eastern half, Byzantium, stood as a beacon of survival. Surrounded by enemies on land and sea, the Byzantines endured for nearly 1,000 years after Rome's fall, often outnumbered and outmatched. Their resilience was due not only to fortifications like the Great Walls of Constantinople, but also to a weapon so terrifying and mysterious that it became legend: Greek fire, the liquid flame that burned even on water. First appearing in the late 7th century AD, Greek fire changed the fate of empires. In 672, during a naval battle against the Arab fleet threatening Constantinople, the Byzantines unleashed their secret weapon. Contemporary accounts describe ships erupting in flames, sailors leaping into the sea only to find the fire clinging to the waves. Panic swept through the enemy ranks. The Byzantine fleet, otherwise outnumbered, secured victory. For centuries afterward, Greek fire remained a guarded state secret, one of the most feared weapons of the medieval world. What exactly was Greek fire? The recipe has been lost to history, closely guarded by the Byzantine emperors and passed only to a select few artisans. Not even allies were permitted to know its formula, and those who tried to steal the secret were punished severely. Modern scholars have speculated that it may have been a mixture of substances like naphtha, pitch, sulfur, quicklime, and perhaps even saltpeter. Some theories suggest it was a kind of early petroleum-based weapon drawn from natural oil deposits in the region. Whatever the exact ingredients, the effect was unlike anything else in warfare. The delivery system was just as crucial as the formula itself. Greek fire was often projected through bronze tubes mounted on ships, essentially making them ancient flamethrowers. Pressure mechanisms allowed jets of fire to be hurled at enemy vessels with deadly accuracy. It could also be stored in clay grenades, hurled by hand or by catapults, shattering into bursts of flame. The combination of liquid fire and ingenious engineering made Greek fire a force multiplier, enabling the Byzantines to hold their own against larger fleets. To understand its terror, one must imagine the battlefield at sea. Wooden ships packed with men, sails taut, and waves crashing, all suddenly engulfed by flames that water could not quench. Sailors tried to douse the blaze, only to find it clinging to wood, flesh, and water alike. Chronicles speak of fire leaping across waves as though alive, consuming everything in its path. To face Greek fire was to face what seemed like divine wrath itself. The psychological effect was as potent as the physical. Armies and navies feared it not only for its destruction, but for its mystery. Enemies whispered that the fire was conjured by sorcery, a gift from the gods of Byzantium. The weapon became a symbol of divine protection, reinforcing the aura of Constantinople as a city under heaven's guard. Greek fire was not invincible, of course. It required skilled operators, careful handling, and favorable conditions. Still, it proved decisive in several sieges and battles, particularly against Arab fleets and during the defense of the empire's coasts. For centuries, it helped Byzantium survive, even as its territories shrank and enemies pressed harder. By the later Middle Ages, the secret of Greek fire was lost. Other incendiary weapons emerged, using gunpowder or other flammable mixtures, but none carried quite the same mystique. Today, the exact formula remains one of history's great enigmas. Was it truly a petroleum mixture? Did it use chemicals that ignited on contact with water? The mystery lingers, adding to its aura. Greek fire reminds us that sometimes technology is as much about secrecy and psychology as it is about chemistry. For Byzantium, it was a lifeline, a shield of flame that for centuries preserved a fragment of Rome. To stand at the Bosporus today, imagining ships aflame on the waves, is to glimpse the terror and wonder of an empire that wielded fire like a god's weapon. At the bottom of the Aegean Sea, off the tiny Greek island of Antikythera, a shipwreck lay undisturbed for nearly 2,000 years. In 1901, sponge divers exploring the wreck brought up statues, coins, and bronze fragments corroded by centuries underwater. Among these encrusted relics was a lump of gears so weathered that at first it seemed unremarkable. But as scholars studied it, the truth emerged. This was no ordinary artifact. It was a machine of extraordinary sophistication, an ancient device capable of modeling the heavens themselves. Today, it is known as the Antikythera Mechanism, the world's first analog computer. Dated to around 150–100 BC, the mechanism stunned historians and engineers alike. Composed of at least 30 bronze gears housed within a wooden box, it was operated by a hand crank. As the gears turned, they moved dials and pointers that tracked celestial cycles. It could predict the phases of the moon, the positions of the sun and planets, and even the timing of eclipses. On its face, scales inscribed with Greek characters marked the cycles of the zodiac and the calendar. On the back, spiral dials charted the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period aligning lunar months with solar years, and the Saros cycle, which predicts eclipses. In essence, it was a cosmic clock, built centuries before the mechanical clocks of medieval Europe. What makes the Antikythera mechanism so astonishing is not simply its accuracy, but its complexity. The interlocking gears were cut with a precision that would not be seen again until the clockmakers of the Renaissance, more than 1,000 years later. Some gears had over 200 fine teeth, meshing perfectly to carry out intricate calculations. The device was not a curiosity, but a practical tool, a fusion of mathematics, astronomy, and craftsmanship. Who built it? Scholars debate. Some credit the school of Hipparchus, the great Greek astronomer who devised models of lunar motion. Others link it to Posidonius, a philosopher and scientist based on Rhodes, where advanced mechanical knowledge thrived. The ship that carried it may have been transporting treasures from the eastern Mediterranean to Rome, plunder or purchase from centers of Greek learning. Whoever the maker, the Antikythera mechanism reveals a level of technical knowledge that challenges our assumptions about the ancient world. For centuries, the device lay forgotten, its true nature hidden. Only with the advent of modern imaging techniques, X-rays and 3D scans, have we begun to understand its inner workings. Researchers have reconstructed its gearing, creating functional replicas that demonstrate its astonishing accuracy. These reconstructions suggest that the mechanism could even model the irregular orbit of the Moon, accounting for its elliptical path with ingenious gearing. And yet, mysteries remain. Was the Antikythera mechanism unique, or were there others like it? If so, why have none survived? Bronze was valuable and often melted down, but the absence of other examples leaves us with tantalizing questions. Was this the work of a lone genius, or the product of a broader tradition of ancient engineering that has otherwise vanished from the record? The Antikythera mechanism also forces us to reconsider history. For too long, the narrative of progress has been linear. Ancient simplicity, medieval stagnation, modern genius. But here is a machine that proves the ancients could rival our ingenuity. It suggests that knowledge can advance, be lost, and perhaps rediscovered centuries later. Today, the fragments of the Antikythera mechanism are displayed in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, corroded but still majestic. Replicas sit in universities and museums, their gears turning once more, echoing the minds that crafted them 2 millennia ago. To gaze upon it is to glimpse the ancient Greeks not as primitive, but as visionaries who sought to bring the cosmos into human hands. The Antikythera mechanism is more than a machine. It is a message from the deep past, a reminder that human genius is timeless. Across centuries and oceans, it whispers of a truth often forgotten, that the ancients too dreamed in gears and stars and built wonders that continue to astonish the modern world. Across the Mediterranean world, the ruins of Rome still rise with quiet defiance against time. From aqueducts that stride across valleys to the Colosseum's massive arches and the dome of the Pantheon, Roman architecture continues to impress not only for its scale, but for its endurance. While empires have fallen and cities crumbled, Roman concrete, opus cementicum, remains standing. The secret of this remarkable material, lost for centuries, has only recently begun to be understood, and it reveals that the Romans were masters not only of conquest, but also of chemistry. Concrete was not invented by the Romans, but they perfected it. Earlier civilizations had experimented with mortars and simple concretes, but Roman engineers transformed the material into the backbone of an empire. Unlike cut-stone masonry, which required immense labor and quarrying, Roman concrete could be poured into molds, shaped into arches, vaults, and domes with unprecedented freedom. It allowed the Romans to build faster, cheaper, and more ambitiously than any civilization before them. The ingredients were deceptively simple: lime, volcanic ash, water, and rubble or stone aggregate. Yet it was the particular type of volcanic ash, drawn from deposits around the Bay of Naples, that gave Roman concrete its astonishing durability. When mixed with lime and water, the ash created a chemical reaction that produced crystals of a mineral called stratlingite, binding the mixture tightly and preventing cracks from spreading. Even more extraordinary was what happened when Roman concrete was exposed to seawater. Instead of eroding, it interacted with the minerals in the water to grow new binding crystals, effectively allowing the concrete to heal itself over time. This self-healing property is why Roman harbor structures, piers, breakwaters, seawalls still stand today, even after 2 millennia of waves battering them. By contrast, modern concrete, though strong initially, often degrades within a century, corroded by salt and weakened by cracks. The Romans, without steel reinforcement or advanced laboratories, created a material more enduring than much of what we produce today. The Pantheon in Rome provides perhaps the most spectacular example of Roman concrete's potential. Its dome, completed around 125 AD, remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. At its center is the oculus, a perfect circle open to the sky. Nearly 2,000 years later, the dome still stands, a testament to both design and material. Engineers achieved this feat not only through clever architecture, gradually thinning the dome and using lighter aggregate near the top, but also through the strength and resilience of their concrete. Concrete also enabled the vast Roman road network, stretching over 250,000 miles. Poured foundations of rubble and mortar provided durability that allowed legions, merchants, and messages to move swiftly across the empire. Bridges, aqueducts, and amphitheaters all owed their permanence to this seemingly humble material. Roman concrete was not just a building substance, it was the silent force that held an empire together. When Rome fell, much of the knowledge of concrete fell with it. Medieval builders relied more on stone, and while they achieved wonders of their own, the recipe of Rome's miracle material lay forgotten. Only in recent decades, with chemical analysis of Roman ruins, have scientists begun to unlock its secrets. Today, researchers study Roman methods in hopes of creating sustainable concretes that can match their durability while reducing environmental impact. Once again, the ancients may inspire solutions for the modern world. Roman concrete is more than a technical curiosity. It is a symbol. It represents the Roman drive to endure, to create monuments not only for their own time, but for eternity. In the mixture of ash, lime, and stone, the Romans found a way to make their ambitions immortal. To walk beneath the Pantheon or across the arches of an aqueduct is to feel the weight of history, borne not by fragile ruins, but by a material that still holds strong. Roman concrete whispers across centuries. Civilizations may fall, but true innovation endures. Few objects in human history have carried as much mystery and awe as the blade. From the Bronze Age dagger to the medieval longsword, weapons have always been more than tools of war. They are symbols of power, status, and artistry. But among them, none have inspired greater legend than the fabled Damascus steel swords. Wavy patterns rippling across the blades, unmatched sharpness, and almost mythical strength. They were said to cut through armor, slice a silk scarf as it floated through the air, and retain an edge that never dulled. For centuries, warriors and scholars alike wondered, what secret lay hidden in their steel? To understand Damascus steel, one must begin in India, with a material known as Wootz steel. Produced as early as 300 BC, Wootz was a crucible steel, created by heating iron with charcoal in sealed clay crucibles. This process infused the metal with carbon, producing ingots of exceptional purity. The unique environment of the crucible allowed slow cooling, during which carbon and iron formed microscopic structures called carbides. When forged into blades, these carbides produced both incredible hardness and striking patterns on the surface, swirls and waves that seemed almost alive. Traders carried Wootz ingots across the ancient world, from India to Persia and beyond. By the medieval period, Syrian swordsmiths in Damascus had mastered the art of forging these ingots into blades of breathtaking quality. Thus was born Damascus steel, a fusion of Indian material and Middle Eastern craftsmanship. The patterns, reminiscent of flowing water or rippling silk, became its hallmark, giving rise to tales that these swords were imbued with magical qualities. Crusaders who faced them in battle during the 12th and 13th centuries returned to Europe with stories of blades that could shear their swords in half. But Damascus steel was not just legend, it was science at its finest. Modern metallurgists studying surviving blades have discovered that the patterns result from the alignment of carbide structures within the steel. This microstructure gave the blades their combination of strength and flexibility. Hard enough to hold a sharp edge, yet tough enough to resist breaking. In effect, Damascus blades achieved a balance that modern metallurgy struggled to replicate until the 20th century. And yet, the secret was eventually lost. By the 18th century, the technique of producing true Damascus steel had faded into obscurity. The supply of high-quality Wootz ingots dwindled as trade routes shifted and Indian production declined. Swordsmiths attempted to recreate the patterns, but the original process, dependent on precise carbon content, crucible conditions, and slow cooling, was forgotten. Later imitations bore the visual patterns, but lacked the extraordinary properties of the originals. The rediscovery of Wootz steel in modern times has shed light on what made these blades so unique. Scientists have found traces of nanostructures within ancient samples, carbon nanotubes and cementite nanowires that may have contributed to the material's resilience. Whether ancient smiths understood this at a scientific level is doubtful, but their empirical mastery was undeniable. Through trial, error, and centuries of tradition, they produced blades whose brilliance we are only beginning to fully appreciate. Damascus steel remains shrouded in romance. It appears in literature and folklore, from Persian poetry to European chronicles, always as a symbol of an edge beyond ordinary steel. To hold such a blade was to hold both artistry and technology, a weapon as beautiful as it was deadly. Even today, modern bladesmiths seek to recreate its glory, forging steels patterned with swirls that echo the originals. Though the true secret of Damascus, the marriage of Wootz and Damascus craft, remains elusive. The story of Damascus and Wootz steel is one of global connection. Indian crucibles, Persian traders, Syrian forges, European knights. It shows how technology can travel, evolve, and vanish, leaving behind only artifacts and legends. And it reminds us that sometimes the greatest innovations are not written in books, but hammered on anvils, passed from one craftsman's hand to the next. To gaze upon a Damascus blade today, its rippling surface gleaming in the light, is to see not just a weapon, but a piece of living history. In its edge lies a whisper of forgotten knowledge, the song of fire and steel that once gave rise to the blades of legend. In the dense jungles of Central America, the Maya built cities of stone, towering temples, and sprawling plazas that rivaled any of the ancient world. But perhaps their most enduring legacy lies not in what they built on the ground, but in what they understood of the skies above. The Maya were masters of astronomy and timekeeping, charting celestial cycles with a precision that still amazes modern scholars. Their calendars did not simply measure time. They reflected a worldview in which the cosmos, the gods, and human destiny were bound together in endless cycles. The Maya developed several interlocking calendars, each serving a different purpose. The most sacred was the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ritual calendar composed of 20 named days, cycling with 13 numbers. This cycle, filled with symbolic meaning, guided ceremonies, divinations, and the rhythms of spiritual life. Parallel to this was the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 nameless days considered unlucky. When combined, the Tzolk'in and Hab formed the calendar round, a repeating cycle of 52 years, after which the same date combination would recur. But the Maya did not stop there. To record history across centuries, they devised the long count, a linear calendar that tracked the passage of days from a mythical creation date in 3114 BC. Using a vigesimal base 20 system, they could count immense spans of time with extraordinary accuracy. Monumental inscriptions often included long count dates, anchoring historical events in cosmic chronology. This ability to measure time on both a daily and millennial scale gave the Maya a unique perspective. Time was not just linear, but cyclical, infinite, and divine. Their astronomy was equally advanced. From carefully observing the motions of the sun, moon, Venus, and other celestial bodies, the Maya created tables and predictions of remarkable accuracy. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan books, contains Venus tables that predict the planet's appearances and disappearances with a precision rivaling modern calculations. Venus was especially important, associated with the god Kukulkan, or Quetzalcoatl in other Mesoamerican traditions, and linked to war, sacrifice, and kingship. Wars were sometimes timed to the rising of Venus, intertwining politics with the movements of the heavens. The Maya also tracked solar eclipses, lunar cycles, and solstices. Temples and observatories such as El Caracol at Chichen Itza were aligned with celestial events, turning architecture into instruments of astronomy. On equinoxes, the Great Pyramid of Kukulkan casts a shadow that looks like a serpent slithering down its steps, an interplay of light, stone, and cosmic symbolism. To the Maya, the heavens were not distant. They were active participants in earthly life, their patterns guiding rituals, kingship, and even agriculture. Perhaps most famous in modern times is the misinterpretation of the long count calendar's end of a major cycle in 2012. While some popular accounts imagined an apocalyptic prediction, scholars emphasize that for the Maya, the completion of a cycle was not the end of the world, but a renewal, a rebirth into a new era. Just as the sun rises each day, cycles end only to begin again. The cosmos, in their eyes, was eternal. The sophistication of Mayan astronomy challenges the notion that advanced science requires modern tools. Without telescopes or modern instruments, they achieved astonishing accuracy simply through careful observation, record-keeping, and the integration of mathematics with cosmology. Their understanding was both practical, helping to time crops, rituals, and governance, and spiritual, binding human life to the cycles of the universe. To study the Mayan calendar today is to enter a worldview where time is alive, not a line marching forward, but a wheel turning endlessly. Every day bore meaning. Every cycle reflected cosmic order, and every moment connected the human world to the divine. The ruins of Mayan cities may be cloaked in jungle, but their knowledge of the stars remains luminous. In their calendars, carved into stone and written in codices, the Maya left us a profound reminder that we too are children of cycles, moving in rhythm with the cosmos, bound forever to the dance of sun, moon, and stars. Long before Rome built its aqueducts or modern cities laid sewer networks, an ancient civilization flourished along the Indus River in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. Between 2600 and 1900 BC, the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as Harappan Civilization, constructed cities of remarkable sophistication. While little is known about their rulers, language, or religion, one thing is strikingly clear: they were pioneers of urban planning and sanitation. Their drains, baths, and water systems were so advanced that they would not be rivaled for millennia. At the heart of Harappan achievement lay their cities: Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dholavira, Lothal, and others. Laid out in grid-like patterns, with streets intersecting at right angles, these cities reveal a sense of order rarely seen in the ancient world. Houses were built with uniform baked bricks, suggesting standardized measurements and centralized planning. But beyond architecture, the most remarkable feature was the sanitation infrastructure woven through the fabric of the city. Every major settlement had an extensive drainage system. Covered, brick-lined channels ran beneath the streets, collecting wastewater from houses and directing it away from living spaces. Many houses had their own private bathrooms, with drains connected to the main street sewers, an astonishing level of domestic sanitation for the time. In contrast, most contemporary civilizations, even the mighty Egyptians and Mesopotamians, lacked such widespread urban plumbing. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro stands as the most iconic example of Harappan water engineering. This massive public bathing structure, 12 meters long and 2.4 meters deep, was built of baked brick and sealed with bitumen to prevent leaks. Fed by a well and drained through a sophisticated outlet, the Great Bath was likely used for ritual purification, reflecting the cultural and perhaps religious importance of cleanliness. It is the oldest known public water tank in the world, a symbol of both engineering and communal life. Wells dotted the cities in abundance, ensuring ready access to clean water. Mohenjo-Daro alone may have had hundreds of wells, many integrated directly into homes. Courtyards featured bathing areas, and refuse was carefully managed. In many cases, drains had removable brick covers, allowing for regular cleaning, a detail that speaks to practical maintenance as well as design. Such attention to sanitation reveals much about the Indus Valley people. Unlike societies that built grand palaces or towering temples, the Harappans invested in systems that benefited the entire community. There is little evidence of monumental kingship or ostentatious wealth. Instead, their genius lay in collective welfare, in making urban life clean, efficient, and livable. This egalitarian focus sets them apart from many ancient civilizations. Yet, for all their achievements, mysteries abound. The Harappan script remains undeciphered, leaving us with no written records to explain how their society functioned. We do not know the names of their rulers, their gods, or even their word for city. What we do know comes from the ground itself: bricks, drains, wells, and baths that whisper of a people who prized order and hygiene. When the civilization declined around 1900 BC, possibly due to climate change, shifting rivers, or resource depletion, much of this urban sophistication vanished from South Asia. Later cultures in the region would develop their own systems, but the scale and uniformity of Harappan sanitation would not be matched for centuries. In a very real sense, The Indus Valley cities were ahead of their time. Today, to walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-daro is to marvel not at fallen palaces, but at streets lined with drains and houses with private bathing areas. It is to see a society that recognized cleanliness as both practical and sacred, weaving water management into the very fabric of daily life. The Indus Valley sanitation systems remind us that true civilization is not only measured by kings and conquests, but by how people live day to day. In their drains and baths, the Harappans left us a vision of urban life built not for the few, but for the many. A lesson as relevant today as it was 4,000 years ago. On the windswept plains of Salisbury in southern England, an ancient monument rises from the earth like a crown of stone. Stonehenge. Its towering trilithons, massive sarsen stones capped with lintels, and its smaller bluestones, transported from distant quarries, have captivated human imagination for centuries. Who built it? How did they transport and erect stones weighing up to 25 tons without wheels, cranes, or iron tools? And why did they build it at all? The answers remain partly shrouded in mystery, but Stonehenge reveals an astonishing mastery of stone engineering and celestial alignment that places its builders among the world's great ancient innovators. Dating from around 3000 to 2000 BC, Stonehenge was constructed in phases over many generations. Its builders were part of the broader Neolithic and Bronze Age cultures of Britain, but later Celtic traditions, especially those of the Druids, became linked to the site in legend and folklore. Though modern archaeology shows that the Druids did not build Stonehenge, the association persists, highlighting its role as a place of ritual, mystery, and connection to the heavens. One of the most striking features of Stonehenge is its astronomical alignment. The monument is carefully oriented so that on the summer solstice, the rising sun appears directly over the heelstone, casting light into the heart of the circle. On the winter solstice, the setting sun aligns with the central axis. These alignments suggest that Stonehenge functioned as more than a ceremonial gathering place. It was also a kind of cosmic calendar, tracking the cycles of the sun and perhaps the moon. For agricultural societies, the solstices marked vital turning points in the year, guiding planting, harvesting, and ritual celebrations. Transporting the stones was itself a feat of engineering. The sarsen stones, some over 20 feet tall, were likely hauled from quarries nearly 20 miles away. The smaller bluestones, weighing up to 4 tons each, were transported from the Preseli Hills in Wales, nearly 150 miles distant. How were they moved? Theories include sledges dragged over wooden rollers, rafts floated along rivers, or a combination of dragging, hauling, and sheer determination. Whatever the method, it required careful planning, organization, and communal effort on a staggering scale. Erecting the stones posed another challenge. The trilithons, 2 vertical stones topped with a horizontal lintel, were set into deep pits, with mortise and tenon joints carved into the stone itself to lock them in place. This precision joinery, more often associated with carpentry than megaliths, shows that the builders were skilled engineers, not merely brute laborers. The result is a monument that has withstood thousands of years of storms, frost, and time. The purpose of Stonehenge remains debated. Some archaeologists emphasize its role as a sacred ceremonial site, linked to ancestor worship or rituals of life and death. Burials have been found nearby, suggesting it served as a place of funerary rites. Others highlight its function as a ritual observatory, allowing the prediction of solstices, eclipses, and lunar cycles. The truth may combine both. Stonehenge as a sacred landscape where earth, stone, and sky converged, binding the living to cosmic rhythms. Later, Celtic traditions, particularly those of the Druids, claimed Stonehenge as their own. The Druids, priestly figures of the Iron Age Celts, were associated with ritual knowledge, astronomy, and the mysteries of nature. By the 17th and 18th centuries, antiquarians believed that the Druids had been the builders of Stonehenge, a belief that still lingers in popular imagination. Even if historically inaccurate, this association reinforces the enduring aura of the monument as a place of ancient wisdom and ritual power. Today, Stonehenge stands as both ruin and revelation. Its stones may be weathered, but its alignments still capture the solstice sun, drawing thousands each year to witness the same spectacle that awed its builders millennia ago. Whether seen as a temple, a tomb, or a celestial clock, it is a testament to human ingenuity, willpower, and the desire to connect the earthly with the eternal. Stonehenge reminds us that even without writing, metal, or machines, ancient peoples could conceive and execute projects of breathtaking ambition. Through stone and sky, they sought order in the cosmos and meaning in their world. And in their enduring monument, they left us a puzzle that still humbles and inspires. The vast oceans that separate continents might once have seemed like insurmountable barriers. Yet human curiosity has always sought to cross them, to push beyond horizons into the unknown. One of the most transformative inventions to make such journeys possible was the magnetic compass, a tool that forever changed navigation and reshaped the history of exploration. And fittingly, it was in ancient China, land of many ingenious breakthroughs, that the compass first came to life. The story begins with the discovery of lodestone, a naturally magnetized mineral of iron. The Chinese observed its peculiar property. When freely suspended, lodestone tended to align itself with the Earth's magnetic field. As early as the Han Dynasty, circa 2nd century BC, texts describe south-pointing spoons made of lodestone, placed on smooth bronze plates where they rotated until their handles pointed south. These early compasses were not used for navigation, but for geomancy, the art of feng shui. The Chinese believed that harmony between human structures and the cosmos could be achieved by aligning buildings and tombs with the forces of nature, and the compass became a spiritual as well as practical tool. By the 11th century AD, however, the compass was adapted for a new purpose: navigation. Chinese sailors realized that the lodestone's directional power could guide ships even when the sun and stars were obscured by clouds or fog. Early compasses were simple, magnetized needles floating in bowls of water or mounted on silk threads, but they revolutionized seafaring. The ability to determine direction reliably meant ships could travel farther from shore, maintain courses through open water, and embark on voyages of unprecedented scope. This breakthrough coincided with the great era of Chinese maritime power. During the Song Dynasty, records describe compasses guiding fleets through the South China Sea, across the Indian Ocean, and as far as the coasts of Arabia and Africa. The instrument transformed trade, connecting China with distant lands and fueling the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture along the maritime Silk Road. The compass did not remain a Chinese secret. By the 12th century, knowledge of it spread westward, carried along trade routes to the Islamic world, and then to Europe. There, it became the foundation for the age of exploration. With compass in hand, navigators like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Magellan dared to cross oceans, opening new worlds and altering the course of history forever. The Chinese invention thus became a global catalyst, shrinking the world and expanding the horizons of every civilization that used it. Yet the Chinese compass was more than a utilitarian tool. Its symbolic power endured in Chinese thought. In feng shui, the luopan, or geomantic compass, grew into a sophisticated instrument with concentric rings of markings, used to align earthly activity with celestial forces. The same tool that guided sailors across seas also guided builders in aligning temples, palaces, and homes with the energy of the heavens. Few inventions straddled the line between science and spirituality so seamlessly. Modern navigation relies on satellites, GPS, and advanced technology, but the principle remains the same: the need to know where we stand and where we are heading. The compass was humanity's first great leap in that direction, a device that gave certainty in the uncertainty of travel. Its invention marked the moment when humans could reliably chart paths through the unknown, guided not by faith in chance, but by the unseen pull of the earth itself. To hold a compass is to hold one of humanity's oldest dreams, the dream of finding one's way. It embodies the ingenuity of the Chinese, who looked at a stone that pointed south and saw in it a key to the world. And in that small needle, turning quietly toward the invisible, lies the power that opened oceans, connected continents, and changed the destiny of civilizations. In the arid landscapes of Persia, where rainfall is scarce and summer heat bakes the soil into stone, water is life. For thousands of years, survival depended not on rivers or lakes, but on ingenious systems that could tap hidden reservoirs beneath the earth. Among the most extraordinary achievements of ancient engineering was the qanat system, a network of underground tunnels that carried water across miles of desert, sustaining cities, fields, and empires. Long before pumps or modern irrigation, the Persians mastered a technology so effective that many qanats are still in use today. The principle of the qanat was simple but brilliant. Engineers identified an aquifer in the foothills of a mountain range, where groundwater naturally collected. From there, they dug a gently sloping tunnel underground, often stretching for many kilometers, until it emerged on the plains below. Gravity did the work. Without pumps or engines, fresh water flowed steadily downhill to where it was needed most. Along the length of the tunnel, vertical shafts were sunk at intervals, serving as both access points for workers and ventilation to keep air circulating. To stand above a qanat is to see a dotted line of wells stretching to the horizon, each a gateway into the hidden artery below. The origins of the qanat system date back to at least the early first millennium BC, with evidence suggesting they were developed under the Achaemenid Empire. By the reign of Darius the Great, qanats were widespread, transforming barren lands into fertile oases. Herodotus, the Greek historian, marveled at the Persian ability to thrive in deserts that seemed inhospitable. Their secret was not magic, but water guided by science, patience, and labor. Building a qanat was no small feat. Workers dug through soil and rock using simple tools, measuring gradients with extraordinary precision to ensure the water would flow smoothly but not too fast. The slightest miscalculation could mean flooding, collapse, or stagnation. Some qanats stretched more than 40 miles, a staggering achievement in both endurance and engineering. The construction often took decades and required generations of effort, but the payoff was immense. Once completed, a qanat could provide a stable, perennial source of water for centuries. Qanats did more than irrigate fields. They sustained entire civilizations. Cities such as Yazd, Nishapur, and Gonabad thrived in harsh environments thanks to these hidden rivers. Fields of wheat, orchards of pomegranates, and gardens filled with roses bloomed in lands that otherwise would have been barren. Even the Persian paradise garden, with its flowing channels and fountains, owed its existence to the qanat, symbolizing the triumph of human ingenuity over nature's harshness. The technology spread far beyond Persia. Conquerors and traders carried it to North Africa, Arabia, and even as far as Spain, where qanats became known as acequias under Islamic rule. In each region, the principle remained the same: tap groundwater with underground tunnels and bring life to the desert. In some places, variations were adapted to local geography, but the Persian genius remained at the core. The social structure of water management was equally fascinating. Qanats were often communal, maintained by families or villages, with strict rules governing usage and repair. Water shares were measured not in volume but in time, with families allocated hours of flow according to their needs and contributions. In this way, qanats shaped not only landscapes but also societies, weaving cooperation and fairness into their very operation. Today, some qanats are still in operation, especially in Iran, where UNESCO has recognized several as World Heritage Sites. Others have fallen into disuse, replaced by modern wells and pumps. Yet modern methods often deplete aquifers unsustainably, while qanats, relying only on gravity, maintained balance between use and replenishment. In an era of climate change and water scarcity, this ancient Persian innovation offers lessons that remain deeply relevant. The qanat system stands as a testament to what can be achieved with vision, patience, and respect for natural forces. It was not technology imposed upon the land, but technology woven into harmony with it. To walk beside the green fields of a Persian desert oasis is to see the hidden miracle of the qanat at work. Rivers flowing underground, silent and unseen, yet carrying the gift of life across centuries. Long before the rise of the Maya or the Aztec, in the humid lowlands of what is now southern Mexico, a civilization flourished that laid the cultural foundations of Mesoamerica, the Olmecs. Known as the mother culture of the region, the Olmecs thrived between 1500 and 400 BC. They left behind few written records, but their legacy endures in monumental works of art and engineering. Chief among these are the colossal stone heads, some towering over 9 feet high and weighing more than 20 tons. These monumental sculptures, carved from solid basalt, stand as enduring symbols of Olmec genius, equal parts artistry, engineering, and mystery. Discovered in the 19th and 20th centuries, the colossal heads have since captivated archaeologists and the public alike. To date, at least 17 such heads have been unearthed, primarily at sites such as San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. Each is unique, with individualized facial features, expressions, and headdresses. They are not generic statues, but portraits, believed to represent rulers or important figures of Olmec society. Their detailed craftsmanship suggests that the Olmecs not only had a highly stratified political system, but also placed great importance on immortalizing leadership in stone. The medium itself reveals much about Olmec ingenuity. The basalt used for these sculptures was not locally available at the main Olmec sites. Instead, it was quarried from the distant Tuxtla Mountains, sometimes more than 50 miles away. How were these immense stones transported across rivers, swamps, and jungles without wheels or draft animals? Archaeologists believe the Olmecs used a combination of rafts, rollers, and sheer manpower, requiring organized labor and meticulous planning. Moving such stones was a feat of logistics that underscored both the authority of Olmec rulers and the technological capacity of their society. Once the basalt reached its destination, the carving process itself demanded extraordinary skill. Using stone tools, hammerstones, and chisels of harder material like jadeite, the Olmecs painstakingly shaped the basalt into human likenesses. The level of detail is astonishing. Broad noses, thick lips, helmet-like headgear, and subtle variations in cheekbones and eyes. Some wear headdresses decorated with motifs, possibly denoting lineage, clan, or role. The naturalism of the faces stands in striking contrast to the abstract symbolic art often associated with early civilizations. The purpose of these colossal heads remains debated. Many scholars see them as commemorative monuments, immortalizing powerful rulers. The helmets they wear may represent protective gear used in ritual ball games, a sacred activity in Mesoamerican culture, suggesting a connection between political power and ritual sport. Others see them as guardians, placed to watch over ceremonial centers or sacred landscapes. Whatever their function, their sheer size and presence would have projected authority, impressing subjects and rivals alike. Beyond their artistry, the heads reveal the Olmec's worldview. Their ability to marshal resources, coordinate labor, and carve enduring monuments points to a society with centralized leadership and a complex social hierarchy. The effort required to produce even one head suggests these were not casual projects, but acts of immense cultural and political significance. The Olmec colossal heads also carry a layer of mystery. With no surviving inscriptions to name the individuals they portray, their identities remain unknown. Were they kings, priests, athletes, or perhaps all at once? Each face is a silent enigma, a glimpse into lives that shaped their world, but left no written testimony. Today, many of the colossal heads remain in Mexico, preserved in museums and archaeological parks. Visitors who stand before them are struck by their scale, but also by their humanity. Carved in basalt thousands of years ago, they still gaze out with expressions that feel alive, bridging the vast gulf of time. The Olmec colossal heads remind us that art is not only about beauty, but about presence and power. These stones, wrestled from mountains and shaped by human hands, stand as monuments to the first great civilization of Mesoamerica. They are both messages and mysteries, whispering across 3 millennia of human history, telling us that even in the dawn of civilization, people sought to leave their mark in ways as enduring as stone. All roads lead to Rome. The phrase has survived for centuries, and though today it is metaphorical, in the time of the Roman Empire it was nearly literal. Stretching over 250,000 miles, with about 50,000 miles paved in stone, the Roman road network was one of the most remarkable feats of ancient engineering. These roads were not mere dirt tracks. They were carefully planned, layered, and durable arteries that bound together an empire spanning 3 continents. They carried soldiers, merchants, ideas, and culture, ensuring that Rome's reach extended from the windswept coasts of Britain to the deserts of Syria. The genius of Roman roads lay in their design and construction. A typical road was built in layers, each serving a purpose. First came a trench, filled with compacted stones for drainage. On top of this, successive layers of gravel, sand, and stone slabs were placed, creating a foundation that could bear immense weight and withstand centuries of wear. The surface was often slightly curved, allowing rainwater to run off into side ditches. This attention to detail meant Roman roads resisted flooding and erosion far better than most modern highways in their early days. Straightness was a hallmark of Roman roads. Engineers used tools such as the groma and chorobates to survey long, direct routes, cutting through hills and bridging rivers rather than meandering around obstacles. This commitment to efficiency reflected the military priorities of the empire. The roads had to move legions swiftly, ensuring that rebellions could be crushed, borders defended, and provinces held firmly under Roman control. Speed and directness were not luxuries. They were necessities of empire. Yet Roman roads were more than military infrastructure. They were the lifelines of commerce and communication. Merchants moved olive oil, wine, grain, and luxury goods across vast distances. Couriers carried messages at remarkable speeds. The Cursus Publicus, Rome's state-run courier system, allowed official documents to travel up to 50 miles in a single day. Towns and villages flourished along the roads, becoming nodes of trade and culture. The roads wove together a mosaic of peoples into a single economic system, making the empire both cohesive and prosperous. The Appian Way, or Via Appia, remains the most famous of these ancient highways. Built in 312 BC, it connected Rome to Capua and later to Brindisi, a vital port for trade with Greece and the East. Known as the Queen of Roads, it showcased the durability and ambition of Roman engineering. Even today, parts of the Via Appia remain intact, their massive paving stones bearing the marks of ancient chariots and carts. The influence of Roman roads extended far beyond their practical use. They were symbols of power and order. In distant provinces, the construction of a Roman road was a tangible reminder of imperial authority, a physical stamp of Rome's presence on the landscape. They brought not just soldiers, but Roman law, language, and culture, accelerating the process of Romanization. When the empire fell in the West, the roads endured. Medieval Europe inherited this network, and many modern roads still trace the paths laid down by Roman engineers. In a very real sense, the infrastructure of Rome outlived its empire, continuing to shape societies long after the Caesars were gone. Modern archaeologists and engineers continue to marvel at the durability of these roads. Some are still visible today, their stone pavements weathered but intact, standing as monuments to a civilization that valued permanence. In contrast, many modern roads require constant maintenance, a humbling reminder that sometimes ancient methods outlast the technologies of today. The Roman roads were more than pathways of stone. They were veins through which the lifeblood of empire flowed. They carried armies that forged conquests, traders who brought wealth, and travelers who spread ideas. They made Rome not just a city, but the center of a world. To walk upon a Roman road today is to tread the same stones that bore the march of legions, the wheels of chariots, and the footsteps of countless people who built and sustained one of history's greatest empires. In the bustling city of Alexandria, where the wisdom of Greece met the knowledge of Egypt, one man stood at the crossroads of imagination and engineering, Hero of Alexandria. Living in the 1st century AD, Hero was a mathematician, engineer, and inventor whose works reveal a world far more mechanically advanced than many imagine antiquity to have been. Among his marvels were devices that seemed almost magical to his contemporaries, automata or self-operating machines. Today, we might call them the first robots. Hero's creations were not simple toys. They were ingenious applications of mechanics, hydraulics, and pneumatics. He wrote detailed treatises, including Pneumatica and Automata, which described dozens of machines powered by air, water, and steam. His inventions entertained, astonished, and demonstrated the principles of physics long before the scientific revolution. They also remind us that the seeds of automation and robotics were planted nearly 2,000 years ago. Perhaps Hero's most famous invention was the Aeolipile, often called the world's first steam engine. It consisted of a hollow sphere mounted on a pair of tubes, which allowed steam from boiling water to enter and escape through bent nozzles. As the steam jetted out, the sphere rotated, demonstrating the principle of reaction propulsion. Though it was never harnessed for industry, the Aeolipile proved that steam could produce motion, foreshadowing the engines that would drive the Industrial Revolution centuries later. Hero's automata extended beyond demonstration. He designed mechanical theaters, miniature stages where figurines of gods and heroes moved, doors opened, and sounds played, all controlled by hidden systems of weights, pulleys, and rotating drums. In one account, Hero described a show lasting more than 10 minutes, with characters advancing, retreating, and even creating the illusion of thunder and fire. These mechanical plays were not only entertainment, but also lessons in mechanics, showing what was possible when imagination was combined with engineering skill. Religious ritual also benefited from Hero's ingenuity. He designed temple doors that opened automatically when a fire was lit on the altar. Heat from the fire caused air to expand, pushing water through hidden pipes into containers that shifted in weight, pulling the doors open as if by divine power. To the worshippers, the gods themselves seemed to move the doors. To Hero, it was simply the clever use of pressure and balance. Such inventions blurred the line between religion, theater, and science. Hero also created devices such as coin-operated machines that dispensed holy water, fountains powered by concealed mechanisms, and even fire engines with hand pumps. His works show an extraordinary grasp of practical mechanics, as well as a flair for spectacle. He understood that technology was not only functional, but could also inspire wonder. It is important to note that Hero did not invent all of these ideas from scratch. He drew upon earlier Hellenistic traditions of mechanics, particularly those of Ctesibius and Philo of Byzantium. But Hero's genius lay in compiling, systematizing, and expanding this knowledge, preserving it in texts that influenced both the Islamic Golden Age and later the Renaissance. In this sense, he served as a bridge, transmitting ancient ingenuity to future generations. Why then did these inventions not spark an industrial revolution in antiquity? The answer may lie in context. Ancient societies relied heavily on manual and slave labor, reducing the incentive to mechanize. Hero's machines were viewed more as novelties, temple wonders, or educational tools rather than practical engines for transforming economies. Yet their existence shows that the knowledge was there. The principles of automation, hydraulics, and steam power were known, waiting for a world that would finally put them to work. To study Hero's automata today is to glimpse the ancient roots of our modern machines. His theaters echo in the circuits of robotics, his aeolipoli in the pistons of engines, his temple doors in the sensors of automatic systems. Across millennia, the dream of creating machines that move on their own has endured, and Hero of Alexandria stands as one of its first great dreamers. In the whir of gears, the hiss of steam, and the silent glide of pulleys, Hero brought the impossible to life. He showed that even in the ancient world, humans sought not only to understand nature but to mimic it, to animate the inanimate, and to infuse wonder into the machinery of existence. High in the towering spine of the Andes, where snow-capped peaks meet valleys carved by glaciers, ancient civilizations achieved what seems impossible. They turned rugged mountainsides into vast fields of food. Long before tractors, irrigation pumps, or even iron tools, the peoples of the Andes, most famously the Inca, but also their predecessors such as the Wari and Tiwanaku, developed one of humanity's most ingenious agricultural systems: terrace farming. These stone-carved steps into the mountains transformed inhospitable landscapes into fertile gardens, feeding millions and sustaining some of the most powerful societies in pre-Columbian America. At first glance, the terraces, known as Andines, look like enormous staircases running along the mountainsides. Each level was carefully constructed with retaining walls of stone, filled with layers of soil and gravel. This design prevented erosion and landslides while creating flat plots suitable for farming. More than just steps, each terrace acted as a microenvironment, capturing rainfall, regulating temperature, and conserving nutrients. By reshaping the land itself, the Andean farmers turned geography into technology. Water management was at the heart of this system. The Andes are marked by extremes, soaring peaks, arid highlands, sudden floods, and seasonal droughts. To thrive here, the Inca developed sophisticated irrigation channels, aqueducts, and drainage systems that distributed water across terraces. Some channels carried glacial meltwater from mountain peaks, ensuring year-round irrigation. Others were designed to drain excess water during heavy rains, preventing fields from being washed away. The precision of these systems reflects not only engineering skill, but also intimate knowledge of local ecology. Terracing also allowed farmers to create climate zones on demand. By building terraces at different altitudes, they could grow crops suited to varied environments: potatoes, quinoa, and tubers at higher elevations, maize, beans, and peppers lower down. In effect, one mountain could host a range of agricultural zones, multiplying food diversity. Some estimates suggest that the Inca cultivated over 70 crop varieties through this system, providing both food security and resilience against crop failure. Perhaps the most astonishing example of this knowledge is found at Moray, an archaeological site near Cusco. There, concentric circular terraces form a vast amphitheater-like structure. Each terrace creates a slightly different microclimate, with temperature variations of up to 15 degrees between top and bottom. Many scholars believe Moray was an agricultural laboratory, where Inca farmers experimented with crops, testing their growth under varied conditions. If true, this makes Moray one of the world's earliest examples of agricultural science. But terrace farming was not merely practical, it was cultural and spiritual. For the Inca, the mountains were sacred, embodiments of powerful spirits called apus. Farming terraces along their slopes was both an act of reverence and survival. The terraces were part of a larger worldview that saw humans as stewards of the land, harmonizing their efforts with the forces of nature. In this, engineering and spirituality intertwined seamlessly. The scale of the system is staggering. Some scholars estimate that the Inca constructed more than 1 million hectares of terraces across their empire, stretching from Ecuador to Chile. These landscapes, visible even today, testify to their ambition and organization. Entire communities worked together under the Maita system of communal labor, building terraces that would sustain not just their villages, but the empire itself. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they marveled at the abundance of food in Andean cities. Without wheels, draft animals, except llamas, or iron plows, the Inca had created an agricultural empire that fed armies, supported massive building projects, and sustained millions of people across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Even now, many terraces remain in use, their designs still effective centuries later. In an age where climate change threatens modern agriculture, scholars are turning once again to the Andes for inspiration. Terrace farming offers lessons in sustainability, soil conservation, and resilience. Ancient wisdom with urgent relevance. To stand among the Andean terraces today is to see more than stone walls and green fields. It is to witness mountains transformed into architecture, valleys shaped into abundance, and a people who refuse to accept the limits of nature. The terraces are monuments not of conquest, but of coexistence, carved step by step into the living rock of the Andes. In the age before compasses, before charts and satellites, the sea was both pathway and peril. For the Vikings, the seafaring warriors and traders of Scandinavia, mastery of the waves was the foundation of their power. Between the 8th and 11th centuries, they sailed their longships across the North Atlantic, reaching as far as Greenland and North America. But how did they navigate such vast distances across stormy seas, often under gray skies where the sun was hidden? The answer may lie in a mysterious tool celebrated in saga and supported by science: the Viking sunstone. The Norse sagas, particularly the tale of Saint Olaf, mention a magical stone that could locate the sun even when hidden by clouds or below the horizon. For centuries, scholars debated whether this was myth or reality. But recent research suggests that sunstones were not fantasy, but a form of polarized light navigation, an ingenious use of natural crystals to read the invisible patterns of the sky. The science behind it is subtle but brilliant. When sunlight passes through the atmosphere, it becomes polarized, scattering in patterns that depend on the sun's position. Even on overcast days, this polarization remains, though invisible to the naked eye. Certain crystals, like Iceland spar, a form of calcite, cordierite, or tourmaline, can filter and reveal this polarized light. By holding such a crystal to the sky and rotating it until the light intensity balanced, navigators could determine the sun's direction with surprising accuracy. Experiments in modern times have confirmed the effectiveness of this method. Tests show that a skilled navigator using a sunstone can locate the sun's position to within a few degrees, even under cloudy or twilight conditions. This would have been a life-saving skill for Vikings sailing across the often foggy, storm-lashed North Atlantic, where landmarks vanished and stars were often obscured. The practical value of sunstones aligns with what we know of Viking voyages. Archaeological evidence shows they reached Iceland, Greenland, and even Vinland, believed to be parts of Newfoundland in North America, centuries before Columbus. Such journeys required confidence in navigation, not mere chance. The sunstone, used alongside other techniques like observing bird flights, sea currents, and coastal landmarks, could have given Viking sailors a reliable edge. A fascinating archaeological clue strengthens the case. In 2013, researchers announced the discovery of an Iceland spar crystal aboard a 16th century English shipwreck, the Alderney, found near the Channel Islands. Though this was long after the Viking Age, its presence aboard a ship equipped with a magnetic compass suggests sailors continued to value such crystals as navigational aids, even in the age of more modern instruments. It provides a tantalizing link between saga lore and real seafaring practice. But beyond its practicality, the sunstone carries symbolic power. For the Vikings, the sea was not merely a highway. It was a realm filled with danger, mystery, and divine forces. The ability to see the hidden sun through a crystal must have felt like magic, a gift of the gods to those bold enough to roam the waves. It reflects the Norse fusion of myth and science, where natural phenomena were understood both practically and spiritually. Today, the idea of navigating with crystals might sound fantastical, but in the hands of Viking mariners, it was part of a pragmatic toolkit for survival and conquest. The longships that carried them to distant shores were guided not only by strength of oar and sail, but also by the hidden patterns of light revealed through a humble stone. The Viking sunstone stands as a reminder that technology is not always made of iron and fire. Sometimes it is hidden in nature itself, waiting for human insight to unlock its secrets. In the shimmer of a crystal held to the sky, the Vikings found their compass, and with it, the courage to cross the unknown seas. In the grand story of civilization, few inventions have reshaped humanity as profoundly as the ability to record, preserve, and spread knowledge. Weapons may win empires, but it is ideas that endure. In ancient China, two transformative innovations, paper and printing, unlocked the power of writing, democratized knowledge, and set the stage for revolutions in culture, governance, and science. These quiet technologies carried humanity from memory and oral tradition into the permanence of the written word. The invention of paper is credited to Kai Lun, an official of the Eastern Han Dynasty, around 105 AD. While earlier forms of writing material existed, bamboo slips, silk, animal skins, and papyrus, they were either too heavy, too costly, or too fragile for widespread use. Kai Lun's process, blending mulberry bark, hemp rags, and flossing nets into a pulp that was pressed, dried, and smoothed, created something revolutionary: cheap, lightweight, and durable sheets suitable for writing. Paper quickly spread across China, replacing bulkier materials and making record-keeping more efficient. The impact of paper was immediate and profound. Bureaucracy, the backbone of the Chinese state, flourished with the ability to maintain archives, census data, and official decrees on manageable sheets. Scholars and poets, no longer limited by the expense of silk or bamboo, found an accessible medium for literature and philosophy. Paper became the canvas on which Chinese culture blossomed, from the ink of Confucian classics to the delicate strokes of calligraphy and painting. But China did not stop at paper. In the Tang Dynasty, around the 7th century AD, another leap occurred: printing. The earliest form, woodblock printing, involved carving entire pages of text or images into wooden blocks, inking them, and pressing them onto paper. Though labor-intensive, this method allowed multiple copies of texts to be produced quickly and consistently. For the first time in history, books could be replicated on a scale beyond the hand of a single scribe. The implications were staggering. Printing allowed for the preservation and wide dissemination of Buddhist sutras, Confucian texts, calendars, and manuals on medicine, agriculture, and technology. Ordinary households gained access to almanacs and prayer sheets, while officials could distribute laws and proclamations more effectively. In a sense, printing transformed not just the spread of religion and philosophy, but the very mechanics of governance and daily life. By the 11th century, during the Song Dynasty, Chinese inventors advanced further with movable type printing. Though initially crafted from clay and later metal, movable type allowed individual characters to be rearranged and reused, reducing the need to carve entire blocks for every page. While the complexity of the Chinese writing system, with its thousands of characters, limited the efficiency of movable type compared to alphabetic scripts, the concept itself foreshadowed the printing press of Gutenberg centuries later in Europe. The spread of paper and printing from China to the rest of the world reshaped history. Through the Silk Road, paper reached the Islamic world by the 8th century, after the Battle of Talas, where Chinese papermakers were reportedly captured and shared their knowledge. From there, it spread to North Africa and Spain, and by the 12th century, Europe was producing its own paper. Printing technology followed, inspiring innovations that fueled the European Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, and the Scientific Revolution. Yet the roots of this transformation trace back to Chinese inventiveness. Paper and printing reveal a truth about technology. It is not always the loud inventions, the weapons, the engines, the towers that most transform the world. Sometimes it is the quiet ones, the sheets of pulp and ink that alter the destiny of civilizations. In their simplicity lay immense power, the power to preserve thought, to multiply knowledge, to challenge authority, and to connect minds across time and space. Standing in the shadow of this innovation, one realizes that our digital age, with its instant communication and infinite archives, is the descendant of these humble beginnings. Every book, every printed word, every shared idea owes something to the moment in China when mulberry bark and ink were transformed into paper and print. It was here, quietly, that humanity gave thought its wings. Long before the modern world discovered the value of rubber for tires, seals, and countless industrial uses, the peoples of ancient Mesoamerica had already mastered its secrets. The Olmec, Maya, and Aztec civilizations transformed the milky latex of the rubber tree into a versatile material for balls, tools, and ritual objects. In fact, Mesoamerica was the first region in the world to develop processed rubber, nearly 3,000 years before Charles Goodyear's famous discovery of vulcanization in the 19th century. At the heart of this innovation was the rubber tree, Castilla elastica, native to the tropical lowlands of Mexico and Central America. The latex collected from these trees was sticky and unstable on its own. It hardened in the sun and grew brittle in the cold. But Mesoamerican peoples discovered a remarkable method of stabilizing it, mixing the latex with juice from the morning glory vine, Ipomoea alba. The chemicals in the vine acted as natural polymers, altering the latex to make it more elastic, durable, and resilient. This process was essentially a primitive form of vulcanization, an ingenious use of chemistry long before the science of chemistry existed. One of the most famous applications of this technology was in the creation of rubber balls for the Mesoamerican ball game, known as olamalistli in Nahuatl. Played on massive stone courts with walls sloping inward, the game involved keeping a heavy rubber ball in play, sometimes weighing up to 9 pounds, by striking it with hips, elbows, or forearms. The ball game was not merely a sport. It was deeply tied to ritual, mythology, and politics. Matches were often staged to resolve disputes, honor the gods, or even accompany human sacrifices. The bouncing rubber ball, something no other ancient culture possessed, was a technological marvel that gave this ritual game its distinctive form. But rubber's uses extended far beyond the ball game. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Olmecs and later peoples crafted waterproof sandals, bindings, adhesives, and even fulguranes from rubber. Coatings of rubber may have been used to waterproof fabrics or containers. The Aztecs were known to fashion rubber into torches that burned with a smoky flame, and into bands or straps that absorbed shock. Rubber became a practical material woven into daily life, not just a ritual object. The chemical sophistication of this process is remarkable. By varying the ratio of latex to morning glory juice, Mesoamerican craftsmen could produce rubber of different properties. A higher concentration of vine extract made the rubber harder, useful for sandals or bindings, while less produced softer, bouncier material for balls. This deliberate manipulation shows that the people understood not just how to make rubber, but how to tailor its qualities, a hallmark of true technological mastery. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 16th century, they were astonished by what they saw. Hernán Cortés wrote of balls that bounced so energetically they seemed alive, unlike anything known in Europe. Europeans had no equivalent material at the time. Leather balls stuffed with hair or feathers were heavy and unresponsive. The elasticity of rubber was so foreign that it seemed like sorcery, another sign to the conquistadors of the strange and wondrous world they had entered. Yet after conquest, the indigenous rubber industry declined. The colonial economy emphasized silver, gold, and other commodities, while the knowledge of latex processing was marginalized. Only centuries later, with industrial science, did the world rediscover rubber's full potential, eventually fueling revolutions in transport, industry, and medicine. Still, it was the Mesoamerican peoples who first unlocked the secret, proving that innovation is not the monopoly of modernity, but a gift scattered across civilizations. Today, the ancient rubber balls displayed in museums stand as silent witnesses to this brilliance. Cracked and weathered with age, they nonetheless preserve the memory of courts once alive with the sound of play, ritual, and competition. They remind us that the story of rubber did not begin in factories, but in the jungles of Mexico, where latex dripped from trees and vines twined together in a chemical partnership discovered by human curiosity. The legacy of Mesoamerican rubber technology is not only in the objects they made, but in the spirit of innovation they embodied. The ability to observe, experiment, and transform raw nature into tools of culture and meaning. From bouncing balls to waterproof gear, the people of Mesoamerica stretched imagination as surely as they stretched latex, leaving behind a technology that still echoes in our modern world. In the cradle of civilization, along the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Babylonians lifted their eyes to the night sky and found meaning written in the stars. For them, the heavens were not empty. They were a cosmic stage upon which the gods signaled their will. Yet in their quest to read these divine signs, the Babylonians did more than shape religion. They laid the groundwork for astronomy itself, creating some of the earliest star catalogs, planetary records, and predictive models in human history. As early as the 2nd millennium BC, Babylonian scribes were inscribing clay tablets with lists of stars and constellations. The famous Mul-Apin tablets, compiled around 1000 BC, contained an astonishing wealth of information. Rising and setting times of stars, lengths of days and nights, seasonal markers, and instructions for intercalating months into their calendar. In essence, these tablets formed a handbook for both astronomy and astrology, linking the cycles of the heavens to the rhythms of human life. The Babylonians divided the sky into recognizable constellations, many of which we still know today. Leo, Taurus, Scorpio, Capricorn, all part of the zodiac they codified. Their method was systematic. They observed, recorded, and compared, generation after generation, until patterns emerged. From this long continuity of data, they began to predict celestial events, the appearance of planets, the timing of equinoxes, and even solar and lunar eclipses. Among their greatest achievements was the accurate tracking of the planetary cycles. Tablets from the Neo-Babylonian period, 7th–5th centuries BC, detail observations of Venus, Jupiter, and other planets, sometimes spanning centuries. By the 4th century BC, they had developed numerical schemes that allowed them to forecast planetary positions with impressive precision. This wasn't astronomy in the Greek sense of geometric models, but rather a mathematical astronomy, based on arithmetic progressions and repeated cycles. It worked, and that reliability was the Babylonians' genius. For the Babylonians, however, the stars were not merely scientific curiosities. They were messages from the gods, woven into the very fabric of fate. Astronomer priests known as Tupshar, Enuma, Anu, and Lil interpreted celestial phenomena as omens. A solar eclipse might foretell danger for a king, while the rise of Venus could signal prosperity or war. Astrology, born from this fusion of observation and divination, became a central part of Mesopotamian culture, later spreading to Greece, Rome, and beyond. Yet behind the ritual, there was rigorous science. The Saros cycle, an 18-year period after which eclipses repeat, was known to Babylonian scholars long before the Greeks formalized it. Their records of lunar eclipses stretch for centuries, showing a commitment to long-term observation unparalleled in the ancient world. Without telescopes, with only the naked eye and simple sighting tools, they created one of the earliest continuous scientific traditions. The legacy of Babylonian astronomy reached far beyond Mesopotamia. When Alexander the Great conquered Babylon in 331 BC, Greek scholars encountered this tradition and incorporated it into their own frameworks. Hipparchus, one of the great Greek astronomers, almost certainly drew on Babylonian eclipse records to refine his models. Later, Claudius Ptolemy in Alexandria continued the lineage in his Almagest. Thus, when we trace the history of Western astronomy, it leads not only to Greece but further back, to Babylonian scribes scratching cuneiform symbols into clay by lamplight. Standing beneath the starlit skies of Mesopotamia, the Babylonians found order in the cosmos. Their star catalogs were not just lists. They were maps of meaning, guides for kings, calendars for farmers, and the first steps in humanity's long journey to understand its place in the universe. To look at the stars today is to follow in their footsteps. We may chart galaxies with telescopes, measure cosmic radiation, and speak of dark matter. But at its heart, astronomy is still what it was in Babylon, a marriage of wonder and observation. The Babylonians remind us that the night sky has always been our oldest book, and they were among the first to learn how to read it. Few weapons in human history inspire as much awe and reverence as the Japanese katana. To the samurai who wielded it, the katana was more than a sword. It was the soul of the warrior, a perfect fusion of deadly efficiency, artistic beauty, and spiritual meaning. Forged through techniques refined over centuries, the katana embodies the extraordinary craftsmanship of Japanese metallurgy, where steel was not simply hammered into shape, but transformed through a ritual of fire, water, and will. The process of forging a katana began with a challenge. Japan's natural iron sands, called tamahagane, were impure and inconsistent compared to the iron ores used elsewhere. Yet Japanese swordsmiths turned this limitation into strength. In massive clay furnaces known as tatara, they smelted the iron sand for days, producing blocks of steel with varying carbon content. From this steel, the smith selected pieces of high-carbon and low-carbon varieties, knowing that their combination would be the secret to a blade both sharp and resilient. The forging itself was a dance of precision. The smith heated and hammered the steel repeatedly, folding it again and again, sometimes thousands of times. Each fold expelled impurities and distributed carbon more evenly, creating layers within the blade. The result was not only structural strength, but a mesmerizing visual texture known as hada, the subtle grain patterns that mark a true katana. But strength alone was not enough. The brilliance of the katana lay in its differential hardening technique. Once the blade was shaped, smiths coated it with a special clay mixture, thick along the spine, thin along the edge. When the heated blade was plunged into water, the edge cooled and hardened rapidly, while the spine cooled more slowly, remaining tough and flexible. This balance allowed the katana to hold an edge sharp enough to cut silk drifting in the air, yet strong enough to withstand the shocks of combat. The quenching process also created the katana's most iconic feature, the hamon, a wavy or straight line visible along the blade where hardened edge met softer spine. More than decoration, the hamon was a fingerprint of the blade's soul, unique to each sword and its maker. To collectors and warriors alike, it was a sign of authenticity and artistry. For the samurai, the katana was more than technology. It was imbued with spiritual significance. Swordsmiths often approached their work as a sacred act, performed with rituals of purity and dedication. Some would fast or pray before forging, believing the spirit of the smith entered the blade. Samurai considered their swords extensions of themselves, symbols of honor and duty. To draw a katana was to invoke not only physical power, but also the weight of one's moral code, the bushido, or way of the warrior. Katana forging reached its height in the Kamakura and Muromachi periods, 13th to 16th centuries, when Japan was a land of near-constant warfare. Masters like Masamune and Muramasa became legendary, their blades praised not only for their sharpness, but also for the mysterious qualities attributed to them. Masamune's swords were said to embody harmony and virtue, while Muramasa's were thought to be cursed, bloodthirsty weapons that drove their wielders to violence. Whether myth or metaphor, these stories reflect the deep connection between craftsmanship and cultural imagination. Even after the samurai age ended in the 19th century, the katana remained an enduring symbol of Japanese identity. Today, master smiths still practice the ancient techniques, recognized as living national treasures in Japan. Each blade takes months to complete, combining fire, hammer, and human spirit in a process unchanged for centuries. To hold a katana is to hold history itself, steel that carries within it the patience of countless hammer strikes, the wisdom of generations, and the spirit of a people who saw no division between art and weapon, craft and soul. More than a sword, the katana is a mirror of its maker and its wielder. A reminder that sometimes the sharpest edge is forged, not only in fire, but in meaning. Rising like frozen rays of sunlight, the Egyptian obelisks are among the most enduring symbols of ancient power and ingenuity. These towering monoliths, carved from a single block of stone and erected with astonishing precision, were not mere ornaments. They were cosmic markers, sacred instruments of religion and statecraft, and demonstrations of a civilization's mastery over both nature and engineering. Even today, thousands of years after their creation, obelisks stand in Cairo, Rome, Paris, London, and New York, silent witnesses to the ambitions of pharaohs and the skills of their builders. The story of the obelisk begins in the Old Kingdom, but it was during the New Kingdom, especially under rulers like Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and Ramses II, that obelisks reached their golden age. Hewn from the rose-red granite of Aswan, each obelisk could weigh hundreds of tons, with some towering more than 100 feet high. They were dedicated to the sun god Ra, embodying the idea of petrified sunlight, a permanent beam connecting earth and sky. The pointed tip, often capped in gleaming electrum or gold, caught the first rays of dawn, linking divine power to the reign of the pharaoh. The quarrying of obelisks was itself an act of audacity. Ancient workers used nothing more than dolerite-pounding stones to chip away at the granite bedrock. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan, abandoned after cracks appeared, remains today as a testament to this process. Had it been completed, it would have weighed an astonishing 1,200 tons, the largest single piece of stone ever attempted by human hands. Its sheer scale leaves modern engineers marveling at the persistence and precision of those ancient artisans. Transporting and erecting obelisks was no less remarkable. Once freed from the quarry, these massive stones were hauled on sledges, dragged across sand lubricated with water to reduce friction, then loaded onto barges to float down the Nile. At the temple site, elaborate ramps and ropes were employed to raise them upright. How exactly this was achieved remains debated, But the results speak for themselves. Perfectly vertical monuments that have stood for millennia, defying wind, time, and even earthquakes. Obelisks were more than architectural marvels. They were symbols of divine kingship. To commission an obelisk was to declare one's alignment with cosmic order, or Mayat. Pharaohs used them to commemorate victories, honor the gods, and assert their legitimacy. Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most powerful female rulers, erected multiple obelisks at Karnak, inscribing them with hymns to Amun-Ra and affirmations of her divine right to rule. Their inscriptions often celebrated the pharaoh's reign as eternal, binding their legacy into the very stone. The fascination with obelisks did not end with the pharaohs. When Rome conquered Egypt, emperors transported obelisks back to the heart of their empire. Augustus, Caligula, and later Constantine erected Egyptian obelisks in circuses and forums, transforming them into symbols of imperial grandeur. Today, Rome alone boasts more standing ancient obelisks than Egypt itself. Later still, during the colonial age, obelisks were carried to Paris, London, and New York, where they remain as trophies of empire and symbols of continuity with the ancient world. What makes obelisks so extraordinary is not merely their size or their age, but their enduring allure. These stone needles condensed into themselves the cosmic beliefs of Egypt, the political ambitions of its rulers, and the ingenuity of its engineers. They were both earthly and celestial, rooted in quarries yet pointing toward the heavens. To stand before an obelisk is to feel the weight of time and ambition. Its shadow, stretching across plazas and temples, is the same shadow that once fell upon the sands of Thebes and the courtyards of Karnak. The obelisk reminds us that human beings, even in antiquity, dreamed of permanence, of connecting heaven and earth through stone. And in these monuments, they achieved it. High in the mountains of South America, where the air thins and the land stretches toward the sky, the Andean civilizations developed a tool so unusual that modern scholars are still trying to fully understand it. The quipu, sometimes spelled quipu, was a system of knotted cords used by the Inca and earlier Andean cultures to record information. At first glance, it looks deceptively simple, a bundle of colored strings hanging from a main cord. But woven within those fibers were numbers, histories, and perhaps even hidden stories, encoded through knots, positions, and colors. Far from being a primitive substitute for writing, the quipu was a sophisticated information technology, one that challenges our assumptions about what writing should look like. The basic principle of the quipu was numerical. Using a decimal positional system, knots of different types and positions represented units, tens, hundreds, and so on. A single quipu could record census data, tribute lists, or storehouse inventories with remarkable accuracy. In fact, Spanish chroniclers marveled at how Inca officials, known as quipucamayuk, or keepers of the knots, could read entire records by running their fingers over the cords. These keepers were living archives, trained to interpret the tactile language of the knots. But as research deepens, scholars have begun to suspect that the quipu carried more than numbers. The choice of cord color, the direction of the knots, and even the spacing between pendant strings may have conveyed symbolic or linguistic information. Some quipus seem to record genealogies, historical events, or even poetry. A study of a set of quipus from coastal Peru suggests that they encoded narrative information, perhaps stories or administrative histories, hidden in patterns that only the trained could decipher. If true, the quipu was not just an accounting tool. It was an alternative form of writing, a medium that blended numbers, memory, and narrative in ways different from alphabets. Variants of the quipu further expand the mystery. Archaeologists have found examples with unusual structures, chords twisted into zigzags, tied into loops, or dyed in complex color schemes. Some of these quipus may have been ceremonial, used in rituals or storytelling, rather than strictly administrative. Others may have served as mnemonic devices for oral traditions, helping keepers recite myths, laws, or prayers with perfect recall. One Spanish observer in the 16th century noted that quipus could even record songs, their patterns serving as cues for performance. The sophistication of this system raises profound questions. Why did the Inca, an empire capable of building vast road networks, agricultural terraces, and monumental architecture, not develop a fully phonetic writing system? Some scholars argue that the quipu was their writing system, but one adapted to their needs and worldview. It was not about inscribing speech onto paper, but about encoding knowledge into objects, blending tactile, visual, and mathematical dimensions. What is certain is that the quipu was central to the functioning of the Inca Empire. With no currency, their economy was based on labor, tribute, and redistribution, all meticulously tracked through quipus. From armies to storehouses, from census rolls to tax obligations, the knots ensured the empire could govern millions across diverse landscapes. Without them, the administrative machine of the Inca state would have faltered. Yet the quipu is also a story of loss. When the Spanish conquered the Andes, they destroyed countless quipus, viewing them as pagan tools. Today, only about 1,000 survive, scattered in museums and collections worldwide. Each surviving quipu is a puzzle, its knots whispering a code we have only partially cracked. Decoding them fully may one day reveal histories and voices that have been silent for centuries. To hold a quipu today is to feel the weight of a vanished empire's mind. Each knot, each strand, each color carries not just data, but intention. A record of lives lived in the high Andes, a memory system as advanced in its own way as any library. The quipu reminds us that knowledge can be stored in many forms, and that intelligence does not always look like ink on parchment. Sometimes it looks like cords tied with care, holding secrets still waiting to be unraveled. In the 2nd millennium BC, a formidable power rose in Anatolia, the Hittite Empire. Though often overshadowed by Egypt, Mesopotamia, or later Greece, the Hittites wielded innovations that changed the balance of power in the ancient Near East. Two of their most transformative contributions were the refinement of chariot warfare and their pioneering mastery of ironworking. Together, these technologies gave the Hittites the ability to challenge mighty neighbors, expand their influence, and leave a mark on history far greater than their fleeting empire might suggest. The chariot was already known in the Bronze Age, introduced into the Near East by Indo-European migrants. But the Hittites perfected its use, turning it from a swift transport vehicle into a devastating weapon of war. Their innovation lay in design and deployment. While Egyptian chariots carried 2 men, an archer and a driver, the Hittite version often accommodated 3 warriors, a driver, a shield bearer, and a spearman or archer. This additional crew gave their chariots more flexibility in combat, allowing them to press harder into enemy lines and sustain longer engagements. The chariots themselves were engineered for stability. They placed the axle near the middle of the vehicle rather than the rear, distributing weight more evenly and allowing for better maneuverability across rough terrain. In battles across Syria and Canaan, these chariots thundered across the plains like ancient tanks, their crews delivering both ranged and close combat power. It was with such chariots that the Hittites clashed with Egypt in the legendary Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BC, one of the largest chariot battles in history. Thousands of chariots stormed the field, and though the battle ended in a stalemate, it proved the Hittites' status as a superpower. Yet chariots alone could not sustain an empire. What gave the Hittites their lasting technological edge was their early and effective use of iron. During an age still defined by bronze, the Hittites were among the first to experiment with smelting and working iron into tools and weapons. The process was difficult. Iron smelting requires higher temperatures and more precise control than bronze. But the payoff was immense. Iron weapons were harder, sharper, and more durable than their bronze counterparts. Although initially rare and perhaps reserved for elites or ritual use, ironworking slowly spread throughout the Hittite state. Over time, their knowledge of extracting and refining iron ore became both a military and an economic advantage. Some scholars suggest that when the Hittite Empire collapsed around 1200 BC, their blacksmiths carried this knowledge with them, helping spark the wider Iron Age across the Near East and Mediterranean. The combination of chariot tactics and iron weaponry created a formidable military machine. With these tools, the Hittites built an empire stretching from Anatolia into northern Syria, dominating trade routes and challenging both Egypt and Mesopotamia. For a time, they stood among the great powers of the Late Bronze Age, negotiating treaties, waging wars, and shaping the geopolitics of their era. But the Hittite story is also one of fragility. Their empire collapsed during the great upheavals of the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC, undone by internal strife, external invasions, and the sweeping disruptions that ended many ancient states. Still, the technologies they advanced did not vanish. The chariot continued to dominate battlefields for centuries, and iron became the defining metal of a new age. The Hittites, though gone, had shifted the very foundations of warfare and technology. To reflect on the Hittites is to remember that power is not always measured in size or longevity. Sometimes it is measured in innovations that outlast empires. Their chariots redefined mobility and tactics in war. Their ironworking ushered humanity into a new technological era. The thunder of hooves and the ring of iron blades remind us of a people who, for a brief moment, held the keys to dominance, and in doing so, changed the destiny of civilizations. When we think of the luxuries of the Roman Empire, visions of marble baths, mosaic villas, and grand amphitheaters often come to mind. Yet behind that grandeur lay a marvel of engineering that touched everyday life in an intimate way. Warmth. In an age when most of the world huddled by open fires or shivered in the cold, the Romans invented one of the earliest known forms of central heating, the Hippocaust system. This ingenious technology allowed them to enjoy heated baths, warm homes, and even cozy floors beneath their feet, long before furnaces and radiators were imagined. The word Hippocaust comes from the Greek roots hypo, under, and caust, burnt, literally meaning heated from below. At its core, the system functioned by circulating hot air beneath floors and within walls. Floors were raised above the ground on short pillars called pili stacks, creating a hollow space. A furnace, or praefurnium, located outside the building, generated intense heat by burning wood. The hot air and smoke from this furnace were channeled into the underfloor space, spreading beneath the rooms above. The floors, often made of thick concrete or tile, absorbed the heat and radiated it upward. Walls, too, could be part of the system. Some hippocausts incorporated hollow bricks or flues built into the walls, carrying hot air upward and warming the entire structure. The result was an even ambient heat, remarkably advanced, compared to the smoky hearths or braziers used by most other ancient peoples. The Roman baths, or thermae, were the ultimate showcase of Hipparchos technology. Public baths were central to Roman life, places of hygiene, socialization, and relaxation. To maintain pools of varying temperatures, from the steamy caldarium to the tepid tepidarium and cool frigidarium, the Hipparchos was essential. Workers known as stoker slaves tended the furnaces constantly, ensuring a steady flow of heat and hot water. The experience must have been astonishing to visitors from colder, less technologically advanced regions. Stepping from icy winter air into a chamber where the very floors and walls radiated warmth. The Hipparchos was not limited to public spaces. Wealthy Romans installed versions in their private villas, particularly in colder provinces like Britain and Gaul. Archaeological excavations of Roman villas in England reveal extensive Hipparchos remains, with pili stacks still standing like rows of miniature columns beneath what were once grand mosaic floors. To walk barefoot across a heated mosaic in a countryside villa was a luxury that few outside the Roman world could imagine. The technology had its costs. Hipparchos systems required enormous amounts of fuel, usually wood, which placed a strain on local resources. Only the wealthy or institutions like bathhouses could afford to run them continuously. Furthermore, maintenance was constant, as ash had to be cleared and furnaces carefully managed. Still, the comfort provided was so valued that the system endured for centuries, spreading wherever Rome's legions and settlers went. What makes the Hipparchos so extraordinary is its foresight. It represents not just luxury, but an understanding of environmental control, a recognition that architecture could shape climate. The principles behind the Hipparchos, radiant heating, circulation of warm air, thermal mass, are echoed in modern systems of underfloor heating and central furnaces. In some ways, we have come full circle, returning to methods first pioneered 2,000 years ago. When the Western Roman Empire fell, the Hipparchos largely disappeared with it. Medieval Europe, facing resource scarcity and social upheaval, reverted to open hearths and fireplaces. It would take more than a millennium for central heating to re-emerge on a wide scale. Yet the ruins of Hipparchos, with their neat stacks of bricks and scorched flues, still speak of a society that valued warmth as part of civilization itself. To step into the remains of a Roman Hipparchos today is to glimpse a quiet revolution, not a weapon of conquest or a monument to power, but a technology of comfort. It reminds us that progress is not always about domination. It can also be about care, about shaping the environment to nurture human life. In the soft heat that once rose through mosaic floors, Rome revealed not just its wealth, but its vision of what it meant to live well. In the ancient world, few colors carried the same aura of power, wealth, and prestige as Tyrian purple. Deep, rich, and enduring, this dye became the emblem of royalty and empire, draped across kings, priests, and emperors. At its heart was the ingenuity of the Phoenicians, the seafaring people of the Levant, who discovered and perfected a method to extract purple dye from the sea itself. What they built was not merely an industry, but a symbol of status so enduring that purple remains linked to nobility even today. The source of this extraordinary color was unlikely. Small marine snails of the genus Murex, common along the Mediterranean coasts. The Phoenicians discovered that within a gland of these shellfish lay a rare secretion that, once processed, yielded a pigment of astonishing vibrancy. But obtaining it was no easy task. The process required thousands upon thousands of snails to produce even a small amount of dye. Archaeologists estimate that a single ounce of Tyrian purple may have required the glands of over 10,000 murex snails. The production was as laborious as it was foul-smelling. Snails were collected in vast numbers, their shells cracked open and the glands removed. These were then left to ferment in brine, exposed to sunlight in carefully timed stages, where chemical reactions transformed the secretion from a pale liquid into deep hues of purple and crimson. The smell of this process was notorious, so pungent that dye workshops were banished to the outskirts of Phoenician cities like Tyre and Sidon. Yet the result was worth it. A fabric dye that did not fade, but seemed to grow richer with time and wear. The chemistry behind Tyrian purple is now understood as a process involving dibromoindigo, a compound stable against light and washing. But to the ancients, it must have seemed nothing short of alchemy. They had turned sea creatures into symbols of divinity and empire. The value of Tyrian purple was legendary. Because of its rarity and difficulty of production, garments dyed in this hue were staggeringly expensive. It is said that in the Roman Empire, a pound of Tyrian-dyed wool could cost as much as a pound of gold. The color became so closely associated with power that Roman law restricted its use. Only the emperor was permitted to wear the toga picta, entirely dyed in Tyrian purple, while senators and generals could wear stripes or borders of the color. To don it without permission was treason, a reminder that in Rome, color was not fashion, but politics. Yet the Phoenicians had already understood the symbolic potency of purple long before Rome. They exported their dyed textiles across the Mediterranean, trading them to Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia. Purple-clad elites projected authority, sanctity, and wealth, and the Phoenicians reaped fortunes from their monopoly. Tyre, in particular, became so synonymous with the dye that the Greeks and Romans called it Tyrian purple, immortalizing the city's name in the language of luxury. The symbolism of the dye transcended material wealth. Purple became associated with the gods, with sacrifice, with the liminal space between mortal and divine. In Christian tradition, the color would later be adopted by bishops and popes, extending the legacy of Tyrian purple into the medieval and modern eras. When the Arab conquests reshaped the Mediterranean in the 7th century AD, the old Phoenician dye industry finally declined. The costly, labor-intensive methods could not compete with new trade patterns and alternative dyes. Yet the symbolism endured, embedded in language and culture. Even today, born to the purple signifies royalty, and purple robes remain emblems of prestige at universities, courts, and coronations. The Phoenician mastery of purple dye reminds us that technology is not always about engines, weapons, or machines. Sometimes it is about chemistry, patience, and an eye for symbolism. In the reek of fermenting snails, the Phoenicians discovered not just a color, but a cultural force. They taught the world that prestige could be manufactured, and that the hues we wear can shape how we are seen. To look upon a fragment of Tyrian-dyed cloth today is to glimpse a secret once guarded by sailors and merchants, a secret wrung from the sea itself. It is proof that the pursuit of beauty and status has always been as powerful a driver of innovation as the pursuit of survival. In the quiet chambers of Tang Dynasty alchemists, where scrolls of Taoist philosophy mingled with jars of minerals and herbs, a discovery was made that would alter the course of human history. It began not with war, but with the search for immortality. Alchemists seeking an elixir of eternal life experimented with strange mixtures of sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. What they found instead was fire, smoke, and thunder, a volatile powder that would eventually reshape empires, redraw borders, and change warfare forever. The world would come to know it as gunpowder. The earliest written formula for gunpowder appears in Chinese texts of the 9th century, particularly in Taoist alchemical manuals like the Zhenyuan Miaodao Yaolwei. These records warn of mixtures that could fly and burn the hands and faces of those who handle it. Clearly, alchemists had stumbled upon a chemical recipe both wondrous and dangerous. The proportions of sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter, each common and seemingly harmless, combined to create an explosive synergy. At first, gunpowder was not seen as a weapon but as a mystical substance. It was used in fleurworks and ritual displays, producing sparks, flames, and booms that were thought to drive away evil spirits. Lantern festivals and religious ceremonies soon featured dazzling explosions of light and sound, a tradition that continues in China today. The spiritual origins of gunpowder highlight the irony of history. What began as a tool of celebration and faith became the foundation of destruction. By the 10th century, the military potential of gunpowder was becoming clear. The Chinese began experimenting with felar arrows, bamboo tubes stuffed with powder that could be launched to spread fire among enemy lines. These early incendiary devices blurred the line between pyrotechnics and weaponry. Soon, engineers developed flamethrower-like devices, known as fire lances, which used gunpowder to propel flames and shrapnel. In time, these evolved into true firearms. The Song dynasty, 960–1279 AD, pushed these innovations further, creating bombs, grenades, and primitive cannons. Records describe iron shells packed with powder that exploded with deadly force, showering battlefields with fragments. By the 13th century, the Mongols, having encountered Chinese gunpowder weapons, carried the technology westward. Through conquest and trade, gunpowder spread across Eurasia, reaching the Middle East and eventually Europe. Within a few centuries, castles, knights, and traditional warfare would be rendered obsolete. Yet in its beginnings, gunpowder was still wrapped in the aura of alchemy. Chinese thinkers saw it as part of the natural balance of elements: wood, charcoal, earth, saltpeter, and fire, sulfur, combining to create something more than the sum of its parts. Its discovery was less about science as we understand it, and more about a worldview that blended chemistry, spirituality, and the search for transcendence. That worldview produced one of humanity's most transformative technologies by accident. The consequences of gunpowder's spread were immense. It democratized warfare, making it harder for elite warrior classes to dominate battlefields with swords and armor alone. It empowered empires that embraced it, from the Ottoman Turks and their great cannons to the European powers that would one day carve global empires through musket and cannon fire. At the same time, it forever altered how humans thought about power itself. Fire and thunder could now be commanded at will, turned against walls, armies, and even the very earth beneath one's feet. And yet, there is a strange beauty in its origin. Before it became a tool of conquest, gunpowder lit up the skies of China in bursts of color and sound. It connected earthbound mortals with the heavens in festivals of light. In a sense, its story is dual, a tale of joy and terror, creation and destruction. The ancient Chinese alchemists sought eternal life, but in failing, they gave humanity something else, an invention that guaranteed no dynasty, no empire, no fortress would last forever. The spark they discovered leapt across centuries and continents, igniting both celebration and devastation. A reminder that the greatest transformations often come not from what we seek, but from what we stumble upon. In the vast sweep of history, empires have risen and fallen not only through armies and conquests, but also through the quieter, invisible arteries that held them together. Communication. For the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which at its height in the 5th century BC stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean, from Egypt to Central Asia, the challenge was staggering. How could a ruler in Persepolis govern millions of subjects across such a sprawling, diverse domain? The answer lay in a marvel of logistical engineering: the Royal Road and its postal system, an innovation that transformed governance into an art of speed and reliability. The Royal Road was not just a single stretch of highway, but the spine of a vast imperial network. Extending nearly 1,500 miles from Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia, it connected the western edges of the empire with its heartlands. From this main artery branched countless secondary roads, linking provincial centers, garrisons, and trade hubs. The route cut across mountains, rivers, and deserts, a testament to Persian ambition and organizational genius. The construction of this system was attributed to Darius the Thetis, the Great, who reigned from 522 to 486 BC. Darius recognized that conquest alone could not hold an empire together. Communication was essential. The Royal Road allowed not only armies and merchants to travel swiftly, but also messages from the king to reach even the farthest satrapies in astonishing time. What made this road extraordinary was the relay postal system that operated along it. At intervals of roughly 15 miles, the Persians established relay stations stocked with fresh horses and riders. Couriers, part of an elite service, would race from station to station, changing mounts without pause. Herodotus, the Greek historian, marveled at this system, writing, "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night prevents these couriers from completing their appointed course with all speed." These words, later adopted by modern postal services, capture the relentless dedication of Persia's couriers. Messages could travel from one end of the empire to the other in mere 7 days, a feat that would take a normal traveler several weeks. In an age before telegraphs or radios, this was nothing short of revolutionary. The Royal Road was not limited to official use. It also facilitated trade and cultural exchange. Merchants could move goods, spices, textiles, metals, and ideas across vast distances with greater safety and speed. Inns, rest stops, and garrisons along the road made travel more secure, weaving together the diverse peoples of the empire. In many ways, the Royal Road anticipated later routes like the Silk Road, setting the standard for intercontinental exchange. But perhaps the greatest impact of the road was political. The empire was divided into satrapies, or provinces, each overseen by a satrap. Without fast communication, satraps could grow too independent, threatening unity. The Royal Road allowed the great king to assert control, dispatching orders, inspectors, or troops with precision. Rebellions could be quelled swiftly. Loyalty could be reinforced with messages of favor. In effect, the road was a nervous system, with Persepolis as the brain and couriers as synapses firing across the body of the empire. When Alexander the Great conquered Persia in the 4th century BC, he was so impressed by the Royal Road that he used it to launch his own campaigns. Later empires, from Rome to Byzantium, echoed the Persian model, understanding that roads and couriers were as essential as swords and shields. Today, traces of the Royal Road still remain in Turkey and Iran, silent reminders of a vision that bound continents together. The Persians knew that empires are not held only by force, but by connection. The thundering hooves of their couriers, racing through night and storm, carried not just parchment, but the lifeblood of an empire. The story of the Royal Road is a reminder that communication itself is a technology, one as vital as metallurgy or engines. By building roads and posts, the Persians built trust in the reach of their king's voice. They proved that power lies not only in conquest, but in connection, and that an empire that can speak swiftly to its edges can endure. Long before the marble baths of Rome or the aqueducts of imperial cities, the island of Crete was home to a civilization whose relationship with water bordered on the miraculous. The Minoans, flourishing between 2000 and 1400 BC, built palaces whose sophistication astonished even the archaeologists who first uncovered them. At the heart of their ingenuity lay a mastery of plumbing and aqueduct systems, technologies that allowed them not only to survive, but to live with a level of comfort and luxury that would not be matched in Europe for millennia. The Palace of Knossos, the legendary seat of King Minos, provides the clearest evidence of this brilliance. Excavated in the early 20th century by Sir Arthur Evans, its ruins revealed something extraordinary. Running water, flushing toilets, and advanced drainage systems, all dating back nearly 4,000 years. In an age when much of the world relied on wells, buckets, and open ditches, the Minoans had engineered a system that feels startlingly modern. Their aqueducts began in the hills of Crete, where fresh mountain springs flowed year-round. The Minoans constructed terracotta pipes, carefully fitted together, that carried clean water downhill into the palace. These pipes were not crude. Some had tapering joints to maintain water pressure, a design feature centuries ahead of its time. Within Knossos, the water supplied fountains, baths, and even toilets. Archaeologists discovered a flushing system in the royal apartments, where water could be poured into a seat to carry waste away through terracotta drains. Equally impressive was their attention to drainage and sanitation. Rainwater and wastewater were channeled through covered drains and clay conduits, directing the flow away from living quarters and preventing flooding. Some drains were equipped with settling basins to filter debris, showing not only engineering skill, but also an understanding of hygiene. For the Minoans, water was not just a necessity, but a carefully managed resource, integrated into architecture and daily life. These systems transformed the Palace of Knossos into more than a fortress or administrative hub. It was a place of comfort and refinement. The presence of private bathrooms, decorative fountains, and freshwater access speaks to a culture that valued well-being as much as power. It is little wonder that later Greek myths depicted Knossos as a place of marvels, home of the labyrinth, the Minotaur, and the brilliance of Daedalus. In the imagination of later generations, it was a palace where technology and myth blurred into one. The Minoans' relationship with water also carried symbolic meaning. Frescoes from Knossos show dolphins, flowing waves, and aquatic motifs, suggesting that water held a spiritual as well as practical role. Surrounded by the Aegean Sea, the Minoans may have seen water as both life-giver and cultural identity, a force to be celebrated as much as controlled. When the Minoan civilization declined, perhaps due to natural disasters like the eruption of Thera, Santorini, or later invasions, much of their technological legacy was lost. Centuries would pass before similar plumbing sophistication reappeared in Europe. Rome would later adopt aqueducts and baths on a grand scale. But the Minoans remind us that the quest for comfort and sanitation had already been realized long before Caesar walked the Forum. To stand at Knossos today, among the ruins of clay pipes and stone drains, is to feel the continuity of human aspiration. The desire for running water, for clean spaces, for luxury woven into daily life is not modern, it is ancient. The Minoans achieved it with ingenuity, patience, and clay, proving that civilization is not only about palaces and kings, but about how we manage the invisible flow that sustains us all. Their story reminds us that progress is often measured not in battles won or monuments built, but in how a society cares for the health and comfort of its people. The murmur of water through the pipes of Knossos was the sound of civilization itself. High in the Andes, where the mountains carve deep valleys and rivers thunder through gorges, the Inca Empire achieved feats of connectivity that astonished even their Spanish conquerors. Without iron, without wheels, and without beasts of burden capable of pulling heavy carts, the Incas built one of the most extensive road networks in the ancient world. But their greatest marvels were the bridges. Suspension bridges woven entirely from grass and felber, spanning chasms that seemed otherwise impassable. These bridges, fragile to the eye yet strong enough to carry armies, stand as some of the most ingenious engineering achievements of the ancient world. The Andes are landscapes of extremes. Deep ravines cut through the terrain, separating valleys where communities thrived. For the Incas, ruling an empire that stretched thousands of miles along the mountains, these gorges posed a deadly obstacle. To maintain unity, they needed roads and crossings that linked cities, farms, and fortresses. Their solution was rooted not in stone or metal, but in nature itself. The Inca suspension bridges were woven from ichu grass, a tough, wiry plant that grows abundantly in the high Andes. The grass was twisted and braided into ropes, some as thick as a human torso. Communities would gather every year to harvest and prepare the fibers, a collective effort that was as much ritual as it was necessity. Smaller ropes were twisted into larger cables, which in turn were anchored into stone abutments on either side of a gorge. Wooden planks, bound with ropes, formed the walking surface, while additional cables acted as handrails. From a distance, these woven structures looked precarious, swaying in the wind above rushing rivers. But in reality, they were remarkably strong. Some bridges spanned over 100 feet, capable of supporting caravans of llamas and steady flows of foot traffic. For the Inca, whose empire relied on chasquis, swift-footed messengers who relayed information across vast distances, the suspension bridges were essential. They allowed communication and commerce to flow as easily as water through a channel. The durability of these bridges lay not just in their construction, but in their maintenance cycle. Unlike stone bridges that stood for centuries, grass bridges required constant renewal. Every year or two, entire villages would gather to replace an old bridge with a new one. The process became a cultural event, blending engineering with ceremony. Songs were sung, rituals performed, and the bridge reborn. In this way, the bridges were never static monuments, but living parts of the community, woven anew through collective effort. Spanish chroniclers were astonished by these creations. Conquistadors accustomed to wooden and stone bridges marveled that the Incas had found a way to span canyons with nothing more than plant fiber. Some accounts describe Spaniards crossing such bridges with fear, clutching at the swaying ropes, while Andean locals walked confidently across. The bridges symbolized the adaptability of a people who turned their rugged landscape from barrier into highway. Even after the fall of the Inca Empire, the tradition endured. One bridge in particular, the Huachaca Bridge near Cusco, has been rebuilt continuously for over 5 centuries, making it the last living example of Inca suspension bridge engineering. Each June, 4 local communities gather to harvest ichu grass, braid the ropes, and replace the bridge. The event is celebrated as both cultural heritage and engineering marvel, a direct link between past and present. Modern suspension bridges, with their steel cables and concrete towers, owe something to the same principles the Incas mastered with grass and stone. The idea of distributing weight through flexible tension, of letting a bridge move with the forces acting upon it rather than resist them rigidly, was embedded in the Andean design. It was a wisdom born not from blueprints, but from observation of nature and collaboration among people. To walk across an Andean suspension bridge was to place your trust not in stone or steel, but in the hands of your community. Each fiber carried not only physical weight, but the memory of labor, ritual, and shared survival. These woven pathways remind us that technology is not always about permanence. It can also be about resilience, renewal, and the bonds between people. Across these 40 journeys into the past, we have walked through empires, temples, palaces, quarries, workshops, and mountain passes. We have followed the footsteps of inventors, priests, engineers, and dreamers who, without the technologies we take for granted today, still dared to solve impossible problems. From the Baghdad Batteries sparking mystery in Mesopotamia, to the woven suspension bridges of the Andes swaying above rivers of thunder, one theme runs clear. Human ingenuity is timeless. These ancient technologies were not random strokes of luck. They were the results of observation, persistence, and imagination. The Romans saw the flow of water and built aqueducts and baths. The Egyptians studied the stars and measured time through calendars, aligning their temples with the cosmos. The Chinese turned alchemy into fireworks and then into gunpowder, igniting a chain of change that spread across the globe. The Phoenicians, with nothing but shells and patience, wrung purple prestige from the sea. The Inca, bound by mountains, braided grass into bridges and memory into knots. Each culture, in its own way, proved that necessity, and sometimes beauty, was the mother of invention. And yet, much of this knowledge has been lost, broken by time, conquest, or neglect. How exactly the pyramids were raised, how obelisks were transported, how the Antikythera Mechanism's gears were conceived, all remain questions that spark debates centuries later. The answers may never be fully known, but perhaps it is the mystery itself that makes these legacies so powerful. The gaps in knowledge invite us to wonder, to imagine, to keep looking. Ancient technologies remind us that history is not just behind us. It is a living puzzle still unfolding. These innovations were not only practical, but also cultural. The Minoan plumbing systems were as much about comfort as survival. The Mayan calendar was as much about spirituality as astronomy. The quipus of the Andes, the purple of Phoenicia, the katana of Japan, each reveals how technology and identity are woven together. They show us that science is never separate from culture. It is the fingerprint of a society's values, fears, and dreams. And perhaps this is why we are still drawn to them. In an age of satellites and smartphones, why do the ruins of a Roman Hippocaust or the image of a Viking sunstone still captivate us? Because they remind us of the continuity of curiosity. The same spark that drove an Inca engineer to weave a bridge drives us to build space stations. The same hunger that pushed a Chinese alchemist to mix strange powders fuels our search for clean energy and medical cures. The tools have changed, but the impulse is eternal. The legacy of ancient ingenuity is not just in what they built, but in what they teach us about ourselves. That creativity thrives under constraint. That solutions can come from listening to the earth, from observing the stars, from weaving communities together. That progress is not linear, but cyclical. What is forgotten can be rediscovered. What seems primitive can be sophisticated, and what seems lost can inspire anew. So as we close this exploration of 40 ancient technologies, let us carry forward not just admiration for the past, but a sense of kinship with it. The ancients were not aliens nor strangers. They were us, with the same minds, the same hands, the same capacity to dream. They looked at rivers, mountains, metals, and stars, and saw possibility. And that is the greatest legacy of all. A reminder that our own age of wonders is part of a much older story, one that began when humanity first shaped stone, tied a knot, or lit a flame. We are heirs to their brilliance and stewards of the same endless curiosity that turned the impossible into reality. The journey of ancient ingenuity is not over. It continues every time we ask, as they did, what if? How? Why not?